There is a moment in the later seasons of The Amazing World of Gumball where, very briefly, you are shown a place that exists behind the show itself. A gray, empty room filled with the unfinished, the rejected, the half-drawn, the abandoned. Characters who were sketched and then scrapped. Ideas that never made it to broadcast, all of them piled up like the lost property bin of a cartoon studio that doesn't know it is being watched. The show calls it the Void. And once you know it is there, the rest of the series quietly changes shape. Tonight on Cortoon, we are going through the entire story of The Amazing World of Gumball, from the very first scene to the cliffhanger nobody ever got an answer to. And we are folding in every major theory the fan community has built around it along the way. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it genuinely helps us keep making these. To understand why The Amazing World of Gumball ended up looking like nothing else on television, you have to start before the show actually existed, with a French animator named Ben Bocquelet, who had been working in advertising in London, drawing other people's pitches for other people's brands and getting nowhere with the kind of ideas he wanted to make. The story he has told in interviews, the one most fans repeat when they want to explain how this strange little series came to be, is that he was about to leave Cartoon Network's development arm in Europe, give up on pitching original work and try something else, when he was given one last chance to bring a show forward. And in a kind of last roll of the dice, he took all the rejected characters from all of his previous pitches, the ones that nobody had wanted, the ones he had been told would never work together, and he put them into the same town, the same school, the same family, and that is what became Elmore. That origin matters because it is also the spiritual logic of the show. The Amazing World of Gumball is, from the very first frame, a story about misfits forced to share a world. A cat and a goldfish and a rabbit, raised by a stay-at-home father and a working mother, surrounded by classmates who are objects, animals, ghosts, weather phenomena, robots, and the occasional sentient piece of toast. Nothing in Elmore fits, and yet, somehow, everything in Elmore belongs. That is the show's first and oldest joke, and it is also, by the end, its most quietly devastating idea. Bocquelet was not a household name when he made the pilot, and the pilot itself, the very early test reel, looked rougher and stranger than what eventually aired. By most accounts, the version of the show that made it to broadcast was assembled with the help of Studio SOI in Germany, Boulder Media in Ireland, and Dandelion Studios, with teams across multiple countries handling different layers of the animation, and that international, patched-together approach is part of why The Amazing World of Gumball looks the way it does. The characters are drawn in flat, cartoony, two-dimensional shapes, but they are placed against real photographs of suburban houses, real grass, real trees, real classroom carpets, real ceilings that look like they belong in a school you remember from somewhere. There are puppets, there are pieces of stop motion, there are computer-generated villains and traditional flat animation and crude pencil sketches and finger puppets and live-action interludes, and all of it is happening in the same town at the same time without anyone noticing that anything is strange. That collision of styles is the most distinctive thing about the show, and it is eventually going to become a clue. Because if you watch enough of The Amazing World of Gumball, you start to feel that the mixing of media is not just a stylistic choice. It is the way the world is held together. And when the show finally turns inward and looks at itself, the cracks in the animation are the first thing it points at. The show premiered on Cartoon Network in May of 2011, with an episode called The DVD, in which Gumball and Darwin damage a rented copy of a film their father had been looking forward to watching, and spend the rest of the episode lying about it. That is, on the surface, a small, low-stakes, domestic plot, the kind of premise that any sitcom for children could have used. But the show, even in that first half hour, was already establishing a pattern that would define everything to come. The Wattersons are not wealthy. The Wattersons are not happy in the way television families are usually happy. Nicole is exhausted. Richard is useless in the way only a comedy father can be useless. And yet he is loved without condition. Gumball and Darwin are inseparable in a way the show insists on without explaining. And Anais, the youngest, the rabbit, is already smarter than anyone in the room and quietly resentful of it. That first episode is not really about a DVD, it is about a household that is one bad decision away from falling apart. And that quiet undertow, that sense of a family always living slightly beyond what it can afford, is going to run underneath the entire series. The jokes will get bigger, The animation will get stranger. The villains will eventually break the fourth wall. But the Wattersons fundamentally are the same family in the last episode that they were in the first, and the show is, in the end, the story of how they survive their own absurd town. Before going any further, it is worth pausing on the town itself because Elmore is not just a setting. Elmore is in many ways the show's central character, and the way the town behaves, the way its rules bend, the way it sometimes seems to remember things and sometimes seems to forget them, is the spine on which every theory you will hear tonight is built. Elmore appears geographically to be somewhere in a vaguely Californian suburban America. There are palm trees in the background of some shots, mountains in the distance, strip malls, a junior high school, a bowling alley, a supermarket, a donut shop, a gas station, a burger joint called Joyful Burger, a railway track that occasionally runs through the center of a plot. But the people in Elmore are not, by any reasonable definition, people. They are sentient bananas. They are walking pieces of cheese. They are cactuses who have crushes on flowers. They are ghosts who haunt their own ex-boyfriends. They are dinosaurs who teach class, and the head teacher is a peanut, and the school counselor is a tiny hippie figure who floats, and the police are donuts and a robot. And at no point does the show stop and explain how this town came to be. It is simply offered to you in the calm, deadpan way only the very best animation can manage, as if to say, of course, this is how the world is. Of course, the boy is a cat, and his brother is a goldfish. Of course, their mother is also a cat, and their father is a rabbit, and their sister is a rabbit too. And the genetics of all of this are never spoken about, because the joke is that it does not need to be spoken about. The Wattersons are a family. Elmore is a town. The story can begin. What you may not realize watching for the first time is that the show is also slowly teaching you to accept absurdity as a kind of language. Each episode of the first season takes one ordinary family situation, a dentist appointment, a school dance, a babysitter, a bad day at work, a long car trip, a haunted house, a misplaced phone, and runs it through a logic that gradually pushes harder against reality. The early episodes are sweet, broadly funny, and structurally familiar. You could, without too much effort, describe the first season of The Amazing World of Gumball as a slightly stranger version of any other family cartoon. But what the show is really doing in those early episodes is building trust. It is teaching you how Elmore works, who lives in it, what they want, what they fear, and then very slowly, almost imperceptibly, it begins to widen the edges. By the end of season 1, characters are addressing the camera. By the end of season 2, the show is making jokes about its own animation style. By the end of season 3, the boundary between Elmore and the production of Elmore is being treated as something the characters are allowed to notice. And by the end of season 5, that boundary is, for one extraordinary episode, completely demolished. The story we are telling tonight is, in some sense, the story of that slow drift from a quiet little family sitcom in a strange town into one of the most self-aware shows ever to air on children's television. And the strangest part is that it never stopped being a quiet little family sitcom. The two things lived inside each other until the end. Let us take the family one at a time because the Wattersons are the engine of everything that follows. And if you do not understand the way they are written, the theories that come later will not land. Nicole Watterson, the mother, is voiced for most of the series by Teresa Gallagher, and she is, in a very real sense, the load-bearing wall of the show. Nicole is a working-class cat with claws and a temper she keeps just barely below the surface, a woman whose ambitions have been quietly compressed by a life she did not exactly choose. She works at a company called the Rainbow Factory in a job that she clearly hates, where she is shouted at by a boss who is barely sentient. And she comes home to a house that is always in some state of mild collapse, presided over by a husband who has never had a job and two sons who routinely set the kitchen on fire. The show is gentle with her. It does not turn her into a stock-harried sitcom mother. It gives her real episodes about real disappointment. There is an episode called The Choices, late in the series, that gives you a version of Nicole's life as it might have been if she had not run away with Richard, and the result is one of the most genuinely affecting half hours in the entire show. Nicole's story is the story of a woman who chose love over ambition, paid the price for it, and never quite stopped wondering. That is unusual ground for a children's cartoon to walk on, and the show very carefully walks it. Richard Watterson, the father, voiced by Dan Russell, is the easy comic engine of the family, the rabbit who never grew up, the man who treats food as a primary love language, who has, in canonical episodes, broken laws of physics by being lazy, who has on more than one occasion driven the family to financial ruin through a misadventure with a sandwich, an inheritance, or a get-rich-quick scheme. The early seasons play Richard almost entirely for laughs. He is loud, lumpen, lovable, allergic to responsibility, and the running joke is that the family functions despite him, not because of him. But as the show progresses, the writers start to give Richard texture. There is an episode in which the show pauses midway through a punchline to suggest very quietly that Richard's incompetence is a coping mechanism. There is another in which Richard is briefly allowed to be the most competent person in the room, and the family is genuinely unsettled by it. A separate backstory episode fills in some of his childhood, and the picture it paints is, if you read it carefully, not as funny as the show pretends. Richard is loved by Nicole, by his children, by the audience, with a depth that the show never has to underline. He is also, by any conventional measure, failing at adult life. And the way the series holds both of those things at once without ever making him pathetic or ever making him a hero is one of its quieter triumphs. Gumball Watterson, the show's title character, is a blue cat of 12 years old, voiced across the run by a small succession of young actors because, very practically, child voice actors grow up faster than animated characters do. The voices you hear in Season 1 are not the voices you hear in Season 6, and the show, at one point, makes a joke about that out loud, in a way only the Amazing World of Gumball would. Gumball is, in temperament, somewhere between an anxious romantic and a complete agent of chaos. He is in love, almost from the first episode, with Penny Fitzgerald, the head cheerleader. He is convinced of his own intelligence and is repeatedly proven wrong by his much smarter little sister. He is loyal to Darwin to the point of self-destruction. He is, in the middle seasons, increasingly aware that he lives in a world that does not entirely make sense, and his reactions to that, his suspicion that something is wrong with Elmore, his occasional direct address to the audience, his half-conscious sense of being narrated, are part of what makes the show's later turn into meta-storytelling feel earned. Gumball is the protagonist not because he is the most interesting Watterson, but because he is the Watterson most likely to notice. And by the time the show ends, he is the Watterson who notices most. Darwin Watterson, the goldfish, has been voiced across the run by a small group of child actors as well, with names like Terrell Ransom Jr. and Danielle T. Hansley among those who carried the role as the original performers aged out. Darwin has a backstory that the show takes its time revealing. He was originally just a pet, a goldfish in a bowl in the Watterson kitchen. At some point before the events of the series, he sprouted legs, climbed out of his bowl, and decided he was now Gumball's brother. The family accepted this without question, the way families in Elmore accept everything. The implications of that are, depending on how closely you look, either a sweet origin story or a quietly unsettling one. Darwin is, throughout the show, the soft heart of the Watterson family. He is kinder than Gumball, more honest than Gumball, more emotionally fluent than anyone else in the house, and he is the only character who reliably tells the truth in a household built on small lies. There is a 2-part episode late in the series that tells you in detail how Darwin became a Watterson, and it is, if you are watching late at night, one of the show's most touching half hours. The takeaway from it is that Darwin was lonely in his bowl, that he watched the family through the glass, that he wanted to be part of them, and that one night he found a way to become so. The show treats that, correctly, as a small everyday miracle. Anais Watterson, the youngest, is a pink rabbit of 4 years old, voiced by Kyla Ray Kowalewski, and she is the secret intelligence of the show. Anais is, by every measurable standard, smarter than every other character in the house combined. She reads, she studies, she solves problems, she manages the household budget on the few occasions when anyone manages it at all. And she is constantly, painfully aware that she lives in a family that does not know what to do with her. The show plays this sometimes for jokes. The 4-year-old who outwits a teacher, the 4-year-old who runs rings around her older brothers, and sometimes for real pathos, the 4-year-old who has nobody at school her own age and nobody at home her own intellect. Anais is also, importantly, the Watterson who most often is correct. When she warns Gumball that a scheme will end badly, the scheme ends badly. When she warns Richard that a decision is unwise, the decision is unwise. The show rarely allows her to win those arguments because if Anais won her arguments, there would be no episode. But the writers seem to know that she should have won them, and they leave that knowledge in the texture of the show like a kind of low hum. By the time the series reaches its later seasons, Anais's intelligence has become a quiet structural irony. The world of Elmore is being slowly revealed to be more fragile and more strange than anyone realizes, and the only Watterson clear-sighted enough to make sense of it is too young to be listened to. There are other figures inside the household, but the family as a unit is held together by these five. The cat, the rabbit, the goldfish, the cat again, and the rabbit again. None of which makes any biological sense, and none of which is ever questioned. That refusal to explain the basic terms of its own setup is one of the show's defining gestures. The Amazing World of Gumball does not justify itself to you, it simply tells you what is and dares you to ask why. And when eventually the show begins to ask why itself, when, in the later seasons, the characters begin to wonder how they ended up in this town with these neighbors and this animation style and this strange floating counselor, the audience is already so deep inside the world that the questions feel like a kind of waking up. You realize, watching late at night, that you have been quietly accepting a great deal of strangeness, and that the show has, all along, been counting on you to do so. That is the trap it sets, and it is a beautiful trap. The first season of The Amazing World of Gumball ran across 36 episodes, with each episode split into two roughly 11-minute stories, and the work it does, in the calm light of hindsight, is mostly architectural. It is building Elmore. It is introducing the rules, or rather, suggesting that there are no rules, and asking you to accept that. It is showing you the Watterson house, the supermarket, the school, the bowling alley, the abandoned warehouse on the edge of town that will, much later, become important. It is letting you meet the neighbors. There is Gumball's class at Elmore Junior High, which by itself is one of the strangest assemblies of fictional beings ever to appear on television. There is Tobias, a small rainbow-colored creature whose entire body appears to be made of soft pastel light. There is Carrie, a ghost who haunts the school halls and slowly, across multiple seasons, becomes a major character in her own right. There is Bobert, a robot who attempts, with the literal mindedness of all robots in comedy, to understand emotion. There is Banana Joe, a banana, and Ocho, an 8-bit pixelated video game character who lives in the regular world without anyone commenting on it. And Alan, a sentient party balloon whose calm, beatific helium-pitched voice masks one of the most quietly disturbing implied stories in the show. There is Sussy, a chin with a small face on it, a character drawn so deliberately ugly and unsettling that her presence in any scene is its own joke. There is Sarah, who arrives later, a sweet, sentient creature shaped like soft pink dough, whose obsession with Gumball and Darwin will become a recurring meta-gag about fandom itself. And of course, there is Penny. Penny Fitzgerald is, when you first meet her, a small antlered peanut with light brown hair and a cheerleader uniform, who blushes whenever Gumball blushes. Gumball is in love with her from the very first episode in which she appears, and the show makes the romantic plot a central undertow of the entire series. They cannot quite say it. They cannot quite do it. They flirt, they fight, they get jealous of phantom rivals, they are pulled apart by other plot lines and dragged back together by the slow gravity of being 12 years old and certain. And then, in one of the most important episodes of the show, an episode called The Shell, Penny breaks open her own outer body, the shell she has been hiding inside, and reveals that her true form is not a peanut at all. She is something fluid and shape-changing. A soft creature made of pale light who can flow between many different animal forms. A swan, a deer, a butterfly, a dragon, all of them her, none of them the final answer. The show frames this as a coming out in the broadest emotional sense. Penny had been told by her father all her life to keep her shell on, to hide what she really was, to be smaller and safer than her instincts wanted. When she finally cracks the shell, she does so for Gumball, but really, she does so for herself. And the relationship between them from that point on is no longer a child's crush. It is two young creatures meeting each other as they actually are, which is, frankly, more emotional honesty than most cartoons attempt at any age. Penny's shape-changing is also a clue. It is one of the first really overt suggestions that the rules of identity in Elmore are not what they appear. If Penny can flow between shapes, what does it mean for Darwin to have grown legs and become a Watterson? What does it mean that Carrie is a ghost who can sometimes be touched and sometimes not? What does it mean that some characters in Elmore are clearly children of their parents and some are clearly not? And some are made of cheese, and some are made of light, and some are made of pixels. The show, even in season 1, is laying down a quiet thesis. The world is not made of one substance, it is made of many. And whatever holds the substances together is fragile and possibly artificial, and possibly, by the end, a story being told to someone in particular. But that is far away yet. In Season 1, the romance with Penny is simply sweet, and the world is simply strange, and the only theory you would entertain watching it for the first time is that this little cartoon is going to be more interesting than it looks, which it is, which it absolutely is. There are other classmates to meet, and the show takes its time with them. Miss Simeon, the prehistoric baboon teacher of Gumball's class, is one of the great cartoon villains of recent memory, not because she is dangerous, but because she is small. She is petty, vain, ancient. In literally millions of years, she has not changed. And her entire personality is the kind of bitter grievance that calcifies in a person who has been teaching the same class of children for too long. Principal Brown, by most accounts a peanut himself, runs the school with a kind of distracted obsession, mostly because he is openly in love with Miss Simeon, and that relationship will become its own minor running plot. Mr. Small is the guidance counselor, a tiny, floating, hippie figure who teaches a class called Social Studies, which appears to consist mostly of yoga, alternative medicine, and gentle spiritual lectures that have nothing to do with anything. He is one of the show's best minor characters, partly because he is so deeply earnest, and partly because his earnestness has a darker edge. Mr. Small genuinely cares about the students. He is also often the only character in the room who notices when something is wrong. There is an episode in which he attempts to teach the children about death, framed as a children's bedtime story, and the result is one of the most surprisingly tender scenes the show ever produced. He is, in many ways, the conscience of Elmore Junior High, and Elmore Junior High, on most days, is not interested in having one. Outside the school, the town is populated by adults whose presence runs from quietly absurd to openly threatening. The Robinsons live next door to the Wattersons, and their dynamic, an old, exhausted man and his small, loyal wife with a son named Rocky, who is the school's friendly janitor and bus driver, is one of the show's longest-running comic threads. Mr. Robinson hates Gumball. Mrs. Robinson tolerates Mr. Robinson. The show plays them for laughs constantly, and then, once in a while, in episodes like The Neighbor, it lets the laughter cool into something a little sadder, a little more like a portrait of a marriage that has lasted longer than anyone wanted. There is the Senecourt family, with Tobias and his older sister Rachel, whose absence from the show after a certain season becomes its own quiet ache. There is the Yoshida family, the Cloud People, with Masami at the center, a spoiled rich daughter whose father is, by most fan accounts, the owner of the Rainbow Factory where Nicole works. The class divisions of Elmore are not played as drama, but they are visible. The Wattersons rent, the Yoshidas own, the Fitzgeralds run a respectable household. The Robinsons live in their small house with their small grievances, and somewhere on the edge of town, in a parking lot in front of the supermarket, there is a homeless Cyclops who reappears across the seasons in increasingly poignant cameos, never quite the focus of an episode, but always quietly there. The show does not preach about him, it simply makes sure he is in the frame. That is part of the texture of Elmore. The strangeness comes with weight if you choose to feel it. If you watch the first season closely now, what strikes you most is how often the show is already gesturing at its own central preoccupation, which is money. The Watterson family is, from the very first episode, broke. They are not theatrically poor. They are realistically poor. Their car barely works. Their fridge is usually nearly empty. Nicole's job is humiliating and pays badly. Richard's lack of a job is treated mostly as comedy. But the show is unusual among children's cartoons in how regularly it lets the comedy curdle. There is an entire episode early in the run called The Check, in which Richard finally gets a paying job, and the family treats his first wage packet as an almost religious event. There is an episode called The Limit, in which Nicole tries to take Gumball and Anais shopping, and the camera lingers deliberately on the way she calculates every item in her basket, every cent, every coupon, every compromise. There is an episode in which the Watterson house is repossessed, and the family is, briefly, genuinely homeless. The show does not dwell on these moments. It moves past them with the speed of a sitcom, but it does not forget them. And by the later seasons, the financial fragility of the Watterson family is no longer subtext. It is text, and it is also, depending on how you read the show, part of one of its largest theories. There is a school of thought among fans of the Amazing World of Gumball that the entire show is, in some sense, an extended portrait of how the lower middle classes survive late-stage capitalism. The Wattersons cannot afford anything. The Wattersons are constantly being scammed, ripped off, undermined, mocked, evicted, replaced. The Wattersons' enemies, when they have enemies, are almost always wealthier than they are. The villains of various episodes are often, when you strip away the surreal exterior, just landlords, employers, salesmen, corporations, banks. The show makes jokes about all of this so brightly that it is easy to miss what the jokes are about. But there is a reason that the most quoted moments of the show, the ones fans share most often online, are the moments where Nicole snaps, or where Richard quietly admits a hard truth, or where Aeneas lays out the family's actual financial situation in calm, terrifying detail. The Amazing World of Gumball is, in a way that very few children's cartoons would dare to be, a show about being poor. And the fact that it sits inside a town where the head teacher is a peanut and the class teacher is a prehistoric baboon does not make that less true. It arguably makes it more true. The absurdity is the cushion that allows the show to say things it would not otherwise be allowed to say. That undertow, the gentle, persistent presence of real money problems underneath fantastical jokes, is also one of the reasons the show ages so well. Children who watched The Amazing World of Gumball when it first aired in 2011 and 12 grew up, became adults, started working unstable jobs in an unstable economy, and looked back at the Wattersons with new eyes. The shows of their childhood that they thought were silly turn out, on rewatch, to be quietly accurate portraits of the lives those children eventually grew into. That recognition, that moment of looking at Nicole arguing with a credit card company and realizing you have had exactly that argument yourself, is part of why the show's fan community is unusual. People do not just like Gumball, they feel known by it. And the theories that grew up around the show, the heavier readings, the ones we are going to walk through tonight, are partly an expression of that feeling. People who are known by a show want to understand it completely. They want to read every frame for clues. They want the world to mean something all the way through. And The Amazing World of Gumball, more than most cartoons, rewards that kind of attention. It planted clues, it kept them, and in the later seasons, it began to admit it. Season 2 of The Amazing World of Gumball expands what the show is willing to attempt. The pace gets sharper, the animation gets a little more confident with its mixing of styles. Whole episodes are devoted to single experiments. There is one that is almost entirely filmed in live action, with the characters interacting with a real human family in a real human house. Another takes the form of a faux documentary about Elmore Junior High. There is, briefly, a plot in which the entire Watterson family swaps bodies, which is, on the surface, a body swap comedy, and underneath, a meditation on how every member of the family quietly resents the others. The second season also introduces, with no fanfare and very little explanation, a small character on a bicycle who passes through the background of several episodes without ever being named. He has one eye, he wears a baseball cap. He is, in those early appearances, just a passerby. He is also, although the audience does not yet know it, going to become one of the most important characters in the entire show. His name is Rob. And from the moment he first appears as a tiny figure in the background of a wide shot, the show is already setting up the long arc that will eventually pull all the loose threads together. Rob, when you first meet him properly, is just another classmate at Elmore Junior High in an early episode in which he attempts to invite Gumball and Darwin to his birthday party and is so completely ignored that he never even gets to give them the invitation. The joke of the episode is how thoroughly the heroes do not notice him. The joke of his existence in the show is how thoroughly the audience does not notice him either. He is a small, easy-to-overlook background figure for entire seasons. He is, the show seems to imply, the kind of person it is very easy to forget. And then, in Season 3, in an episode called The Nobody, the show does something extraordinary. It pulls Rob out of the background, makes him the focus of an entire half hour, and gradually reveals that he is suffering from a profound, almost existential crisis. He is, he discovers, a character so minor that the show itself has been ignoring him. The world of Elmore literally does not see him. People pass through him as though he is not there. His parents have forgotten him. And by the end of the episode, in a moment that is, by any reasonable standard, devastating, he falls through a crack in reality into a place behind the show. A gray limbo full of half-drawn shapes and discarded ideas, where the lost things of the production go to be forgotten. The show calls it the Void. And once Rob has been to the Void, he can never quite come back the way he was. That is the moment, more than any other, when The Amazing World of Gumball becomes the show fans now think of when they think of the show. Up to that point, it was a brilliant, strange, funny family sitcom with a wider visual imagination than its peers. After that point, it is also a show about itself. It is a show that knows it is a show. It is a show in which the discarded characters of a writer's room form their own population, in which the world has gaps you can fall through, in which the rules of fiction are something a character can become aware of, and then, slowly, enraged by. Rob, in the Void, becomes a different creature. He becomes the antagonist the series has been quietly building towards. He is broken, he is bitter, he is the rejected first draft of a person, dragged into the spotlight by an accident of plot, and he is going to spend the rest of the series trying to make the heroes pay for the fact that nobody ever paid attention to him. That arc is, in many ways, the spine of the second half of the show, and every theory that grew up around the amazing world of Gumball, every reading of the simulation, the universe, the ending, has its roots in what the Void implies, which is that the writers of this show know exactly what it is they are doing. They know they are throwing characters away. They know we are watching them do it. And they are willing, eventually, to make the throwing away into a story of its own. Before we follow Rob fully into the second half of the series, it is worth pausing on Season 3, because Season 3 is where the show begins to do its quietest, deepest work, and where the long arcs that pay off in the finale are first put down. There is the episode called The Shell, which we have already mentioned, in which Penny breaks out of her shell and reveals her true form. There is The Choices, in which Nicole's life is shown in fragments as a series of points at which she could have gone in another direction. There is The Code, in which Gumball and his friends commit to telling the truth for an entire school day, and the result is a kind of slow, comedic collapse that turns, by the end, into a meditation on how much of polite society is held together by small lies. There is The Job, in which Richard, for the first time in the show, is allowed to be competent, and the universe of Elmore physically begins to break down because of it. The show plays it as a joke. Reality is, the implication goes, calibrated for Richard to be a failure. If he succeeds, things go wrong. That is the kind of detail you can read past lightly the first time. The second or third time you watch the show, it stops feeling like a joke. It starts to feel like a clue. There is also, in Season 3, the slow introduction of the meta layer that the show will eventually live inside. Characters begin to look at the camera. Characters begin to refer casually to the audience. Episodes begin to play with their own structure. There is one in which Gumball and Darwin attempt to recreate the events of the show in a slightly different style, deliberately drawn as a sort of student film, and the seams between the styles become the joke. In another, the family sits down and watches a recap show of their own previous adventures, and the recap show is, of course, the episode itself. The Amazing World of Gumball is, by the third season, no longer pretending that it does not know what it is. It is a cartoon on a network made by people, watched by you. And the characters, in a slow drift that nobody quite calls attention to, are starting to remember that. That drift will accelerate sharply in the seasons that follow. By Season 5, Gumball will, in a single line of dialogue, address the audience directly. By the same season, the show will quite seriously consider the possibility that the universe of Elmore is a simulation. But all of that is built on what Season 3 quietly accumulates. The small, sweet, domestic show is teaching itself to look outward, and occasionally it is teaching the audience to look back. Rob's transformation, after the Void, is the bridge between the two versions of the show. In his first appearance after returning, in an episode that arrives later in the run, he is unrecognizable. His body has been broken and recombined. One of his eyes has been replaced. His face is half flat and half textured, half hand-drawn and half digital, half flesh and half something that looks like the static of a damaged television screen. He has retained his memory of falling through the world, and he carries with him a piece of the world he fell into. He becomes, in a single half hour, the show's first real supervillain, a sort of cosmic ex-employee with a personal grievance against the protagonists. And the engine of his villainy is, importantly, not malice for its own sake. He wants Gumball to suffer because he wants Gumball to know what it is to be forgotten. He wants Elmore to break because Elmore broke him. He is, in many ways, the most coherent villain the show could possibly have invented, because he is a villain made of its own discarded material, returning to demand acknowledgement. And the hero's response to him, episode after episode, is to try to defeat him as if he were a regular threat, when in fact he is a structural one. They cannot beat him by being braver or smarter or more skillful. He is not really part of their story. He is the story coming back to ask why it threw him away. What Rob does, more than anything, is push the show into open meta territory. Once Rob has broken out of the void, the laws of the world start to bend around him. He gains the ability to manipulate the animation itself. He gains weapons that operate on the level of the show's production, not its plot. He can edit reality the way a character cannot because, in a sense, he is no longer fully a character. He is a character who knows he is a character. And the rest of the cast, including Gumball and Darwin, who have always had a slight uneasy sense that the world is not quite right, slowly start to catch up to him. There is a sequence late in the run in which Gumball and Darwin, alone on the school bus, begin to discuss whether the universe of Elmore could be a simulation, whether everything around them is being generated by some unseen process, whether their lives are real. It is played, of course, partly for comedy. They are 12. They overshoot. They become hysterical. But the show, with what is by now its trademark sleight of hand, lets the question hang in the air after the laugh dies. The possibility is not dismissed. It is, in a sense, marked. By the time the next major arc arrives, the possibility is being taken seriously. The disaster, arriving in the final stretch of the original run, is the moment the show goes the furthest into its own machinery. And it is also one of the bravest half hours of children's television in living memory. It begins as a domestic plot, a Watterson family trip gone wrong, but quickly resolves itself into a confrontation between Gumball, Darwin, and a small, unsettling rival who claims to have discovered a way to manipulate the universe itself. Across the episode, the laws of the show are deliberately, repeatedly broken. Frames are skipped, scenes are rewound and replayed, characters edit each other out of existence. The fabric of the cartoon is treated as a physical thing, something that can be pulled at, torn, and stitched back together. And by the end of the episode, the answer to the question Gumball had been quietly asking for 2 seasons, whether the world is a kind of dream, whether it is being made by someone, whether anyone is in charge, is given an answer that the show then carefully refuses to confirm. The episode ends, like so many of the show's deepest episodes, on a small smile and a moment of acceptance. Gumball, at the end, decides that whether the world is real or not, he is going to live in it. That is the show's answer. It is also, quietly, the show's manifesto. Season 6 was billed when it began as a celebration of everything the show had become, and for most of its run, it operates as exactly that. There are episodes that revisit minor characters from the early seasons and give them their own quiet little spotlights. There are episodes that experiment with form even more boldly than before, including some told almost entirely from the point of view of objects, others told in unbroken single takes, and others again drawn in radically different visual styles for thematic reasons. There is a half hour in which the entire Watterson family attempts to win a game show and ends up trapped inside the show itself, with the genre of the show changing every few minutes. There is another in which the family is forced to confront their own historical decisions, in a kind of dreamlike sequence that shifts between the show's present and the show's past. And there is, threaded through the whole season, a slow accumulation of detail about a coming event, something larger than any of the previous antagonists, something that will, the show implies, change the shape of Elmore for good. Rob is preparing, the void is widening, and the writer's room, you can feel, is gathering itself to land a punch nobody has yet seen coming. What nobody knew at the time, watching Season 6 week to week, was that this final stretch of the show was already the end. The Amazing World of Gumball was not officially announced as concluding when Season 6 aired. There was no farewell episode, there was no carefully written goodbye. The show simply, with the airing of its final Season 6 episodes in 2019, stopped. The closing arc is, by design, a cliffhanger. The plot, in broad strokes, involves the arrival of an outside force at Elmore Junior High, an investigator whose ostensible purpose is to root out anomalous activity, who is in fact searching for the entire population of strange beings that make up the school. The investigator turns out to be, in the show's calm and devastating way, not actually after the children, but after the very nature of Elmore itself. There are hints throughout the episode that he is connected to a larger organization, that what is happening to Elmore is the beginning of something larger, that someone somewhere has decided to clean up the town. And in the final moments of the episode, with the Wattersons drawn into the center of the danger, The credits roll on a story that has very deliberately not finished. That is where the Amazing World of Gumball stopped airing. That is where it sat for years. And it is where, even now, fans return when they want to understand why the show is still such a quiet, open wound for the people who loved it. To understand what that final cliffhanger was really about, you have to look at what the show had been doing in the years leading up to it. By the final season, the world of Elmore had stopped being just a strange town. It had started to operate visibly like an unstable simulation. Characters slipped between forms, backgrounds glitched, scenes ran differently the second time you saw them. The cracks that had begun with Rob falling into the void were no longer cracks, they were the architecture. And the largest theory the show inspires, by a wide margin, is the one that takes this most seriously. The argument here, when the fan community lays it out, is that Elmore is not a town. Elmore is a simulation, possibly a dream, possibly a thought experiment being run by an unseen intelligence. Possibly something more literal, a program that the characters live inside and that the production of the cartoon corresponds to in some way the show implies but never confirms. The simulation theory is the gravity well around which every other Gumball theory orbits. And it is worth taking seriously because the show, more than once, gives it permission to be taken seriously. The first piece of evidence the simulation theory rests on is simply the way the show is animated. Elmore is built from mixed media because, the theory goes, Elmore is built from whatever happened to be lying around. The characters are flat cartoons because cartoons are cheap. The backgrounds are photographs because photographs were easier to source than painting full backgrounds for every scene. The villains in the late seasons appear as crude pencil sketches because crude pencil sketches are the residue of an artistic process that has run out of time. The world of Elmore is, on this reading, a kind of compromise made by the system that generates it. It is not a real place that the show is depicting. It is the result of a process trying to depict a world and getting only as close as it can. That is, very nearly, the metaphor the writers seem to be playing with. The Amazing World of Gumball is a cartoon. Cartoons are made by people, badly, under deadlines, with whatever resources can be found. So is Elmore. So, the show implies, in its quieter moments, is the world that we live in, depending on which philosophical framework you happen to like that evening. The second piece of evidence is the consistency of the glitches. Once Rob has fallen through the world and come back, the rest of the show pays much closer attention to the small ways in which Elmore does not behave like a stable physical environment. Time passes differently in different scenes. Characters disappear from one episode to the next without explanation, and then return without explanation. The age of every character is, very carefully, never clarified, because the show acknowledges, in jokes that get sharper as the seasons progress, that animated characters do not really age. There is a running gag that Gumball is still 12 years old, and Anais is still 4 years old, and Darwin is still 10 years old, after years and years of stories that should have moved them forward. The show is open about it, the audience laughs along, but underneath the joke is a structural claim. The characters are not aging because the world they live in does not require them to. They are loops, the theory suggests, running in a simulation that is not yet finished, not yet shut down, not yet sure what it wants them to do. And the only people in the show who really notice this are the people who have somehow seen behind the curtain. Rob, briefly Gumball, occasionally Mr. Small in his slightly stoned, gently mystical way. The signs of the simulation are everywhere, the theory argues. The show is just choosing how loudly to point at them. The third piece of evidence, and the one that the show goes furthest in supporting, is the existence of the void itself. If Elmore is a simulation, then the void is the part of the simulation where the rejected drafts go. It is the cutting room floor made physically accessible to the characters. The animators throw away their unfinished sketches and their broken assets, and the show, in a turn that feels almost confessional, makes those rejected fragments into a place where the abandoned characters live. That is the strongest possible visual statement of the simulation idea, because it makes the production of the show indistinguishable from the geography of the show. The places that exist in Elmore are the places that exist on the writer's page. The things that get cut are the things that the world remembers as missing. And once you have shown your audience that this is how your fictional world is built, the audience will begin to read every detail through that lens. Why is the world so easily edited? Why do characters break the fourth wall? Why does the show occasionally pause and reload, replaying scenes with slight differences, the way a video game replays a save state? The answer, in every case, the theory says, is that we are not watching a story. We are watching a simulation that the story is being run inside. It is worth being careful here because the show never explicitly says any of this. The simulation theory is exactly that, a theory. It is the dominant interpretation among fans, but it is interpretation, not canon. The show flirts with the idea, plays with it, gives Gumball lines that seem to acknowledge it, and then refuses to fully commit. That refusal is, in a way, the show being responsible. If it had confirmed the simulation, it would have ruined its own ending. The whole emotional engine of the series depends on the Wattersons being real to each other and to us, even if they are not real in the philosophical sense. The show is not asking whether Elmore exists. The show is asking whether it matters that it exists, in the way we usually mean that word. Gumball, at the end of the disaster, decides that it matters. He decides that whatever the world is, he is going to live in it and love the people in it. That is the show's answer, dressed up as a half-hour cartoon, and it is, in its calm way, more grown-up than most serious dramas manage. But there is a darker version of the simulation theory, and it is worth describing carefully because it is the version the fan community returns to whenever the show is discussed seriously online. The darker version says that the simulation is not benevolent. The simulation is in trouble. The cracks getting worse across the seasons are not a stylistic choice. They are a sign that something is failing inside the structure of Elmore. The arrival of the investigator in that final cliffhanger on this reading is the arrival of someone from outside the simulation, someone whose job is to clean up the broken instance and shut it down. The Wattersons are not the protagonists of their own story. They are, at the end, the population of an experiment that someone is about to switch off. The cliffhanger of the final episode is, on this theory, not a cliffhanger waiting for resolution. It is the moment just before the power is cut. The reason the show never resolved on this reading is that the resolution had already happened, and we just were not allowed to see it. That is the kind of theory you do not bring up at a party. It is also when you are tired and listening to the rain, and you have been thinking about Elmore for an hour, the kind of theory that lands a little harder than it should. For what it is worth, nothing official confirms the dark version. The show's actual end was the result of, by all accounts, ordinary television industry circumstances, including changes at Cartoon Network and the conclusion of the original production team's contracts. The cliffhanger was not planned as a final goodbye. It was meant to lead into another arc. The reason it became the end is mostly a story about scheduling and corporate decisions, not about cosmic horror. It is important to keep these two things separate. There is the story the show is telling inside itself, and there is the story of how the show got made outside itself. And the simulation theory is best appreciated as an interpretation that respects the first story without confusing it with the second. The Amazing World of Gumball was a cartoon made by real people in real studios. It came to a stop because of real decisions made by real executives. The fact that the cartoon itself is partly about how cartoons get made does not change that. It just gives the ending a kind of strange echo. The Wattersons were always going to vanish. The only question was how. If the simulation theory is the show's largest theory, the void is the show's largest single image. And any honest reading of The Amazing World of Gumball has to sit with the void for a while before moving on. The void is, on the surface, exactly what it appears to be. It is a gray, empty room, accessible only through cracks in the world of Elmore, where forgotten and rejected things go. The first time you see it is when Rob falls into it, and the first impression is of a kind of warehouse, a storage space, an attic of unfinished thoughts. But the longer the show lets you look at the void, the more it begins to feel like something else. It begins to feel like a holding pen. It begins to feel like a place that is aware of being a place. The half-drawn characters who shuffle around inside it have voices. They have small relationships. They have the weary, faded body language of people who have been waiting a very long time. They are not props. They are residents. And once you have seen them, the population of Elmore begins to look different, because you realize that structurally, the Wattersons could end up in the void too. Anyone could. Anyone on this show could be the one the writers decide to forget. That implication is the engine of every reading of The Void that treats it as more than just a clever sight gag. The reading that the fan community returns to most often is The Void as Purgatory, or in a slightly less religious framing, The Void as the unconscious of Elmore. It is the place the world puts what it does not want to think about. It is the place the writers send the ideas they could not make work. It is the place where, when a beloved minor character vanishes for a season or two without explanation, you start to wonder if they have, in some sense, been sent. The implication, if you take this reading seriously, is that Elmore is not a stable world made up of fixed inhabitants. It is a world that is being constantly edited. Things are being added, removed, redrawn, reassigned. The void is the rubbish bin into which those edits are dropped. And the Wattersons are, on this reading, simply the characters who happen to have remained on screen long enough to count as the protagonists. They were not selected for greatness, they survived the cull. There is a darker reading still, which is that the void is also where dead characters go. This is one of those theories that the show does not explicitly endorse and does not explicitly reject, and it lives in the texture of the writing rather than in any single line. There is the question, asked across the run, of what death actually means in Elmore. Characters get hit by cars and survive. Characters get electrocuted and survive. Carrie is a ghost, which implies that there is at least one character who died, but the show is calm and tender about her and does not treat her existence as horror. Other characters live in conditions that should be physically impossible. The rules around mortality in the show are unusually loose, even by cartoon standards. The void as a kind of afterlife for the forgotten, on the reading the fan community sometimes lands on, is the place where the rules of mortality finally apply. It is the place from which there is, possibly, no return. Rob is the only character we ever see climb back out of it, and he does so transformed, broken, half of the person he was, half of something the void made him into. The implication is that even the few who come back do not come back whole. The richest part of the void, though, is what it suggests about responsibility. If the writers are sending characters to the void, the writers are making a decision about who gets to matter. The show, by making the void visible to us, is implicating itself in that decision. There is a moment in the Rob arc where Rob looks directly at the camera and asks why we did not notice him sooner. It is a small line. It plays as a joke. It is also one of the most quietly accusatory lines the show ever writes. The audience watches 100 episodes without remembering his name. The audience, in some sense, is part of the system that sent him to the void. And the show, in giving him that line, refuses to let the audience off the hook entirely. The forgetting is collective. The forgetting is also, in a way, the natural state of stories. We cannot remember every minor character. We cannot keep every secondary thread alive in our heads. The void is the price stories pay for being told at all. And the show, in being honest about that price, is doing something only the best children's animation ever attempts. It is admitting what it has cost to make the world we are watching. Once you have accepted the void as part of the world, the question becomes what the void wants. And the show answers that question, at least obliquely, through Rob himself. What Rob wants in the second half of the series is to be remembered. He does not want power for its own sake. He does not want money. He does not want, in the conventional sense, to defeat the heroes. He wants Gumball to know that he exists. He wants Elmore to look at him and recognize him as a character who counts. And every time he is denied that recognition, every time Gumball brushes past him or laughs him off, the void's grip on him grows tighter and his methods grow stranger. By the time he is willing to risk the destruction of the universe in order to be seen, the show has, very carefully, made you sympathize with him without quite admitting that it is doing so. He is the antagonist. He is also structurally correct. The world he lives in really did treat him as disposable. And if you were treated that way, the show suggests you might also try to break the world. You might also climb out of the void with a piece of it in your hand and use it to make the people in the bright part of the screen finally turn around. That is, in many ways, the show's most adult idea. The villains in the Amazing World of Gumball are not evil. They are forgotten. The threats to Elmore come, almost always, from inside Elmore, from the systems and habits and casual cruelties of the town's everyday life. The bullies are bullies because nobody at home loved them. The mean teacher is mean because the years have rotted her. The strange figure who lurks at the edge of the supermarket is there because nobody ever found him a place. The investigator who arrives in the final episode is, the show implies in its final hours, also someone's old hurt come round again, dressed in authority. There is no demon in the show. There is no other place from which evil comes. There is only Elmore, looking at itself and noticing, slowly, what it has done. The void is the visible form of that noticing. And if the simulation theory is the show's largest cosmology, the void theory is its conscience. The two read together. They are not separate. They are the same idea, looked at from different angles. Whether you accept those theories as fully meant or not, the texture of the show supports them. There is no episode in the Amazing World of Gumball that flatly contradicts the simulation reading. There is no episode that flatly forbids the Void as Purgatory. The writers consistently leave themselves the option of meaning both things, and they consistently choose to leave the audience with the doubt. That choice, that refusal to settle into a single explanation, is part of why the show has aged so well in the fan imagination. There is no canonical answer to spoil. There is no episode that says, "Here's the truth, take it or leave it." There is only the world of Elmore, with its photographed backgrounds and its puppet supporting cast and its hand-drawn family and its quietly haunted void, all of it held together by a refusal to explain itself. The audience does the rest of the work, which is possibly exactly the kind of viewer this show was always quietly looking for. The next theory worth sitting with is the theory of Richard Watterson, which is, in some ways, the saddest theory the show has produced. Richard, on the surface, is the show's broadest comic figure, a giant, lazy pink rabbit father who does almost nothing and ruins almost everything. But the further the show goes, the more carefully it lets the audience see that Richard is not the man he appears to be. The theory the fan community has built around him, drawing on lines and scenes scattered across the run, is that Richard is, at some level, deeply aware of how much harm his incompetence does to the people he loves, and that his refusal to grow up is a kind of long, soft, self-protective surrender. The show implies, more than once, that Richard once had ambitions. It implies, more than once, that something happened in his early adult life to break those ambitions. And it implies, in its quieter moments, that the cheerful, careless father we see in the present is a man who has chosen not to try anymore, because every time he tried, the world hurt him and the people around him. The clearest piece of evidence for this reading is the stretch in which the show finally lets Richard be competent and shows the consequences. There is a sequence of plot late in the run in which Richard becomes good at his life. He gets a job, he keeps the house in order. He is, briefly, the man Nicole always quietly hoped he might be. And the world of Elmore, in response, begins to physically collapse. It plays as a cosmic joke. Reality has been calibrated for Richard to fail, and when he succeeds, reality cannot sustain itself. The joke is brilliant. The joke is also, on the second viewing, much darker than it pretends to be. It implies, in the most surreal way the show can manage, that Richard's failure is doing something to hold the world together. That the family, the household, the town, in some sense, runs on his inability. Take it away, and everyone has to look at things they would rather not. Richard's incompetence is the soft padding around the truth of the Wattersons' life. And when you peel it away, you find a family that is, by most measures, in trouble. There is another reading of Richard that is gentler, which is the reading that focuses on the love. Richard is not a good father by the standards of most fictional families. He does not work. He does not provide. He does not, on the surface, do most of the things a sitcom would identify as fatherhood. And yet, in the moments where the show needs him to be a father, he is unfailingly present. He hugs his children when they cry. He listens to Anais when nobody else will. He defends Gumball when Gumball has been cruel to himself. He sits with Nicole through the small disappointments of her week, and the show makes sure to give him those scenes, not framed as comic, but framed as real. The argument the show is quietly making is that the kind of fatherhood we tend to picture, the providing, the disciplining, the steering of a household, is not the only kind of fatherhood that counts. Richard is loved by his children because he is, in the precise hours when love is required, soft and present and entirely on their side. The rest of the time, he is a disaster. But the show, over and over, refuses to let the disaster outweigh the love. It is one of the few cartoons of recent memory that gives you a hopelessly inadequate father and refuses to make him a villain. He is too gently drawn, he is too clearly trying, he is too tired. There is a third reading of Richard which combines the previous two and turns them into something more disturbing, and it is the reading that ties him most directly to the show's deeper theories. The theory here is that Richard is, in some sense, an old version of Gumball. Watch them next to each other for any length of time. They have the same sweetness. They have the same talent for self-destruction. They have the same hopeless romantic attachment to small dramatic gestures. They have the same way of believing, just for a moment, that they can succeed, before the world reminds them that they cannot. The show even, very late in the run, builds an episode around their structural similarity and lets the audience see Gumball's potential future in Richard's present. It is, depending on your mood, either funny or quietly horrifying. Richard on this reading is what Gumball becomes if Gumball gives up. He is the version of Gumball that stopped fighting. He is what the future of the protagonist looks like in a world that does not reward the protagonist's effort. The show does not let this reading dominate, but it leaves it open, and if you sit with it long enough, it changes the way you watch every scene with Richard in it. He is not just the comic father, he is the warning at the end of the corridor. What makes this hold together as a serious reading is the way the show treats Nicole. Nicole, by the late seasons, has been given enough backstory and enough quiet melancholy that the audience can fill in the rest. She did not have to marry Richard. She did not have to keep him. She did. And the show lets you see, in the choices and in scattered moments across the run, that her love for him is a choice she keeps making day after day against advice, against logic, against the woman she might have been. The Wattersons are not a tragic family in the conventional sense, but there is a low, steady seam of melancholy running through their marriage that the show, in its calm, intelligent way, refuses to ignore. Richard's softness, his incompetence, his refusal to grow are not just gags, they are a weight Nicole carries. And the show, in writing him with this much care, is saying something quietly devastating about how love actually works in a house that cannot afford to be honest. Nicole picked him. Nicole keeps picking him. And somewhere the show implies there is a version of the family in which that choice is also a kind of small, ongoing grief. That reading is, perhaps, the most important theory about the amazing world of Gumball, even though it is the least often discussed online. It is the theory of the family itself, and it is the theory that the show, in its calm refusal to be sentimental, makes you build out of the texture of its everyday scenes. The Wattersons love each other. The Wattersons are, in many ways, failing each other. The Wattersons are not going to escape Elmore because Elmore is not somewhere they can leave. They are going to keep on as they are. The mother is going to keep working a job that is beneath her. The father is going to keep being unable to help. The children are going to keep growing in a household that is too small and too loud and too full of small lies. And the show is going to keep loving them. The amazing world of Gumball does not promise its characters happy endings. It promises them only that someone is paying attention. And given how much of the show is secretly about the people who never get that promise turns out, by the final season, to be one of the deepest gestures the writers ever make. They were watching. They were not going to forget. The theory of Penny Fitzgerald is in some ways the most beautiful theory the show invites, and the one that needs the gentlest handling because at its center is one of the most graceful pieces of writing in the entire run. Penny, when we meet her, is a small antlered peanut presented as a cheerleader with a sweet, round face, with a quiet manner and a tendency to blush. The relationship between her and Gumball is, for the first 3 seasons, the central romantic plot, the kind of low-stakes, pre-adolescent infatuation that any family cartoon might have used. And then, in the late 3rd season, in The Shell, the show changes the terms entirely. Penny's father, a strict and protective figure, has been keeping her shell on her by family rule. Penny breaks the shell open during an emotional confrontation with Gumball, and what emerges is a fluid, light-filled creature, able to take any animal form she wants. The show treats the moment as a coming-out scene without ever quite calling it that. The metaphor is open enough to read in several ways. Some fans read it as a queer coming of age. Some read it as a story about emotional vulnerability. Some read it as a story about parental control. The show, very deliberately, supports all of these readings without privileging any of them. And that openness is part of what makes Penny one of the most thoughtful characters in modern cartoon history. The theory that has grown up around Penny since The Shell is that her shape-changing is not just a metaphor for her own emotional life. It is, the theory argues, a clue to the underlying nature of identity in Elmore. Penny can be many shapes. The implication is that her true self is not any particular shape. It is the changing itself. She is, on this reading, the most honest character in the show because she is the character who has stopped pretending that she has a fixed form. Compare her to the other inhabitants of Elmore. The Wattersons are locked into the shapes they were given. The teachers are stuck in the bodies their roles assign them. Carrie is, even as a ghost, the same ghost from episode to episode. Penny, alone among the main cast, can become whatever she needs to be. And the show, when Penny is on screen at her most emotionally complete, lets her drift between forms in a way that feels, in the calmest possible way, like a depiction of someone finally being themselves. The theory goes that Penny is the show's vision of what could happen if Elmore loosened its grip on identity. If every character were allowed to be as fluid as she is, the town might function differently. The fact that she is the only one who has this gift, the theory continues, is the show's quiet way of saying that the rest of the town is held together by a rule. And the rule has costs. There is a quieter reading of Penny still, which is the romantic reading, and it deserves a moment of its own. The relationship between Penny and Gumball is, by the standards of children's animation, unusually mature. They argue, they make up, they have small misunderstandings, they have a real friendship that exists separately from the romance. And the show, in the episodes that focus on them most carefully, treats their 12-year-old love as something neither too small nor too large. They are not a couple from a teen drama, they are not a joke pair either, they are two young creatures who have been given each other early, and who are quietly learning, over the run of the series, what it means to love a person who can change shape. Penny's gift on this romantic reading is also a test for Gumball, and the show is genuinely curious about whether Gumball will pass it. He is impulsive, he is jealous, he is 12. He has every reason to want Penny to be one fixed thing he can hold in his head. The show very carefully lets him learn that she will not be. He does not get to know what shape she is going to take this week. He has to love whatever shape arrives. And the gentleness with which the show writes him learning that over the seasons is one of its most graceful longer arcs. The Amazing World of Gumball is not usually thought of as a love story, but underneath the surface, it is, in part, the story of a boy learning to love a person whose form is not under his control. And it is the show's particular gift that it can hold that as a serious idea without ever raising its voice. A theory worth touching on at this point, because it sits at the meeting point of all the others, is the theory of the Watterson curse. This is the idea, often advanced in long fan essays, that the entire family is locked into a generational pattern of failure that cannot be broken from the inside. Nicole's parents, glimpsed across a handful of episodes, are formal, demanding, emotionally cold cats who long ago decided that Nicole had thrown her life away on Richard. Richard's parents, glimpsed across a different handful of episodes, are a chaotic, irresponsible, oddly tender rabbit couple who clearly raised him to expect very little of himself. The show implies, in places, that Richard's father was the one who finally taught him to give up, and that Nicole's mother was the one who finally taught her to settle. The two adult Wattersons we know are, on this reading, the product of two opposite kinds of parental damage. They met, they fell in love, and they made a household that contains both. And the children, growing up inside that household, inherit the pattern. Gumball is romantic and chaotic, like Richard. Anais is rigorous and self-denying, like Nicole's mother. Darwin is, in a quieter sense, the only one who escapes, because he was not born into the family. He chose it. And the show, in its calm, honest way, gives him a slightly different relationship to the family's gravity than the others have. He is in it, but he is not quite of it. If you accept the Watterson curse reading, then the entire show becomes a long study in whether the family can break out of its own patterns. The episodes in which the Wattersons fail in small, recognizable ways, the bad money decisions, the avoidance of conflict, the comfort eating, the petty grudges, are not just sitcom material. They are the cycle in action. The episodes in which the Wattersons succeed, the rare half hours in which they pull together and overcome something real, are moments in which the cycle is briefly suspended. And the question the show is quietly asking behind all the absurdity is whether the suspension can ever be permanent, whether one of the Wattersons might eventually escape. The show characteristically refuses to answer. Gumball, by the end of the aired run, has not escaped. Anais, by the end of the aired run, has not escaped. Nicole, by the end of the aired run, has not escaped. The cycle holds. But the show, in its final season, gives every Watterson a moment in which they imagine the escape. And the imagining itself, the show seems to say, is worth something. The dream of getting out is part of how you live with not being out. The Watterson curse reading sits on top of the larger reading of Elmore as an economic prison. The Wattersons are not poor by accident. They are poor because the world of the show is structured around their poverty in a way that does not give them an exit. The systems that surround them, the schools, the banks, the workplaces, the landlords, are all calibrated to extract more than they give. The Rainbow Factory is a place where Nicole's labor is consumed by a boss who barely acknowledges her. The school is a place where Anaïs's intelligence is wasted because the school cannot keep up with her. The town's businesses are mostly run by people who would happily ruin the Wattersons if it brought in a few extra dollars. The show makes all of these systems visible without preaching about them. It does not lecture. It simply, in episode after episode, lets the audience see what it costs to live in Elmore if you do not start with money. And by extension, it lets the audience see what it costs to live in the real world for anyone whose situation rhymes. The Wattersons' inability to climb out of poverty is, on this reading, not a personal failing. It is the structure they live inside. And the curse, if there is one, is not really on the family. It is on the world the family was born into. It is worth pausing here to take Darwin and Aeneas on their own, because the secondary Wattersons are, in many ways, the show's most quietly radical creations, and the theories around them are some of the gentlest in the fan community. Darwin, the goldfish brother, is, in his original premise, almost too sweet to be a real character. He is the pet who became a person because he wanted to belong. The show on the surface simply uses him as a soft counterweight to Gumball's chaos. He says the kind thing. He hugs the right person at the right moment. He sings when songs are required. He is, in a literal sense, the show's heart. But the more careful reading of Darwin, the one that turns him into something more than a brother-shaped accessory, is the reading that pays attention to what he gave up to become a Watterson. He was a fish. He had a fish's life in a small bowl with a small horizon and a small but apparently sufficient existence. He climbed out of that life and replaced it with this one. And the show, in its quiet way, never lets you forget that he made a choice. He is the only Watterson whose family membership is contingent. Everyone else was born into it. He volunteered. And the implication is that, in some sense, he could volunteer. The show never makes him do so. But the option, the structural option, is there. The theory that some fans build around Darwin's choice is that he is, in some sense, the show's own audience surrogate. He chose to enter this family the way the audience chooses to enter the show. He grew legs and walked out of his bowl the way the viewer presses play on the next episode. And his constant, gentle attention to the family's emotional weather is, on this reading, the show's model of how it wants to be watched. Care about these people, the show is saying. Pay attention to the way they treat each other. Notice when one of them is hurting, stand by them even when they are wrong. Darwin's relationship to the Wattersons is, in this sense, also the show's relationship to its viewers, mediated through a small goldfish with a soft voice. He is the version of you the show is whispering that this story could turn you into if you let it. That is a more flattering reading of the audience than most cartoons attempt. The Amazing World of Gumball is not afraid of being kind to the people watching it. It assumes the best of them. Anais, the youngest, is the show's hardest character to write well, and the show mostly succeeds in writing her well. A small child with adult intelligence is, in fiction, a difficult balance to strike. Make her too cynical, and she becomes obnoxious. Make her too soft, and she stops being smart. Anais is held across the run in a place where she is allowed to be cleverer than everyone in the room, and also be a 4-year-old who needs a hug at the end of a bad day. The show gives her crushes, the show gives her stuffed toys, the show gives her, in a few quiet episodes, the same loneliness her brother sometimes feels, but for different reasons. Gumball is lonely because he cannot quite reach Penny. Anais is lonely because she cannot quite find anyone at her level. The show, when it focuses on her, has a real tenderness about the way intelligence isolates the people who have too much of it. And the theory the fans build around her, the saddest and most precise one, is that she is the Watterson most likely to leave. Of all the family, Aeneas is the one whose future is least imaginable inside Elmore. Nicole is going to keep working her job. Richard is going to keep being Richard. Gumball is going to drift sweetly into the same life his father has. Darwin is going to stay because his belonging is a daily renewable miracle. Anais, the theory argues, will get older and look around and realize that the only way she can survive her own intelligence is to leave the town that raised her. The show never confirms this. The show, in its calm refusal to overcommit to any single character's future, never lets the audience see what becomes of Aeneas as an adult. But it puts down the seeds, the episodes in which she yearns for a school worthy of her, the episodes in which she dreams of being recognized, the episodes in which she sits late at night with a book and looks out of her bedroom window at a town that cannot keep up with her. The audience watches those episodes and quietly understands that, of all the Wattersons, she is the one who will outgrow the limits she was born into. And that, on this reading, is the show's quietest tragedy. Not that Aeneas will fail, that she will succeed and have to leave the family she loves in order to do so. These character theories, taken together, form the show's larger answer to the simulation question. The Amazing World of Gumball, the more carefully you read it, is not really a show about whether Elmore is real. It is a show about whether the love inside Elmore is real, and what that love costs the people who carry it. The simulation reading is, in a sense, the show's way of clearing the philosophical ground. Once you accept that the world might be a construct, the question of how to live becomes the only question that matters. And the answer the show offers again and again is that you live by paying attention to the other people in the construct with you. You notice when Rob is lonely, even if he is a minor character. You notice when Penny is afraid to break her shell. You notice when Richard is, behind the comic surface, very tired. You notice when Nicole has come home and is holding herself together by a thread. You notice when Anais has, again, won an argument she did not want to win. The act of noticing, the show argues, is what makes any of this real, simulation or not. And the act of forgetting, conversely, is what builds the void. The show is a very careful argument for the moral importance of attention, dressed up in the most ridiculous town it could find. That argument deserves its own naming because it is the most consistent through line in the entire series. Call it, if you like, the noticing theory. The noticing theory holds that the universe of Elmore is, by its nature, indifferent. The systems do not care, the town does not care, the simulation, if there is one, does not care. The only thing that can make Elmore matter is the act of one inhabitant turning towards another and seeing them. The Wattersons are the protagonists because they notice each other. Penny is the love interest who finally gets seen, because Gumball notices her in the form she really is. Rob is the antagonist because nobody noticed him in time. Mr. Small is the wise figure because he notices everyone and remembers them. The homeless Cyclops at the edge of the supermarket is given small recurring cameos throughout the show because the writers, in their quiet way, are noticing him on the audience's behalf. The noticing theory turns the Amazing World of Gumball into a kind of moral instruction manual for the world, delivered in surreal cartoon form, and the audience, watching late at night, drowsy and forgiving, is being invited to take that lesson with them when they sleep. It does not matter, the show suggests, whether the world is a simulation. It matters only what you do with the attention you have inside it. It is worth turning, for a stretch, to the production side of the show, because the story of how the Amazing World of Gumball was made is part of why the story it tells lands the way it does. Ben Bocquelet has spoken in interviews, going back across the run, about the unusual structure of the writer's room and the way the show was built. The team was small, multinational, and unusually free to experiment, partly because the show did not arrive with the weight of a famous intellectual property behind it. There were no toy lines to protect at first. There were no comic book canons to honor. There was no novelistic source material to be faithful to. There was instead a collection of unused characters and a French animator with an unusual sensibility, and the result was a show that allowed itself to do almost anything, as long as it could be made to fit inside half an hour. That freedom, in television terms, is rare. It is the reason episodes can be filmed in live action, or stop motion, or with sock puppets, or in unbroken single takes. It is the reason the show could, at any point, decide to be a horror story, or a romance, or a musical, or a satire. The Amazing World of Gumball was given permission to be all the things a cartoon could be, and it took the permission seriously. There is, in interviews, a recurring theme about the way the show kept changing as it grew. The voice actors changed, partly because the children playing the main parts grew up. The animation teams rotated. The writers themselves moved on and were replaced. Bocquelet himself stepped back from his role as showrunner partway through the run, with the later seasons being shaped in significant part by other voices in the team. The texture of the show shifts accordingly across the seasons. The early seasons are a little softer, a little sweeter, a little more interested in pure domestic comedy. The middle seasons are sharper, faster, more confident, more willing to play with form. The late seasons are denser, stranger, more meta, more interested in the philosophical underbelly of the world they had built. Watching the show as a whole, you can feel the production thinking about itself in real time. And by the final season, you can feel a team of people who know that their experiment in suburban surrealism has outgrown the format it started in, and who are pushing harder against the edges because they suspect the format is not going to last forever. The end of the original run in 2019 was not announced as an ending. It was, by all available accounts, the result of the show finishing the order that had been agreed and a new order not, for a number of reasons related to Cartoon Network's wider plans at the time, being commissioned in the same form. The team disbanded. Bocquelet, in interviews after the final episode, spoke openly about how the show had stopped in the middle of a story and how he hoped it would one day be given the chance to finish. For years, there was no news. Fans waited. Forums kept up the conversation. The Amazing World of Gumball lived on in streaming services, in clip compilations, in the long discussions about meaning and lore that this very script is, in a sense, part of. The show became one of those rare projects that, in being cut off mid-sentence, gathered a devotional audience precisely because its silence implied so much more. The cliffhanger was no longer just a cliffhanger, it was a kind of permanent mood. The Wattersons were frozen mid-panic, the investigator looming over them, the town suspended on the edge of catastrophe. And the fan community, in the years after, turned that suspension into the show's defining image. Whatever Elmore is, the audience seemed to decide, it is a place trapped in its own last moment. Then, after a long stretch of silence, news began to surface that the show was being revived. A film was announced, then announced again with more detail, with Ben Bocquelet attached, and the original studio involvement reformed. A new season was announced to follow the film. The plan, as discussed in public interviews and in coverage at the time of writing, was that the film would pick up from the cliffhanger and lead into a new run of episodes. As with all things in television, the details have shifted across announcements, and the final shape of the revival has changed more than once. It is important to be careful with these details because exactly what airs and exactly when and exactly how it will be received is not something this script can confirm. What can be said broadly is that the show is no longer treated as a finished story. The cliffhanger is no longer the end. It is, the announcements imply, the bridge into whatever comes next. Whether that bridge will live up to the weight the fan community has put on it is, of course, a different question entirely. The show, as it stood at the end of its original run, was suspended in a moment of such elegant tension that any continuation faces a difficult job. But the existence of the continuation, however it eventually appears, has already changed the way the show is remembered. There is a theory about that too, and it is worth naming. The theory holds that the cliffhanger was always going to be resolved, but that it took the show being away for long enough that the audience could process what they had lost. The Amazing World of Gumball, the theory goes, was a show that needed to be missed before it could be finished. The team needed the silence. The audience needed the silence. The void of the show's absence had to be sat with for years before the writers could come back to it with the necessary respect. And whatever the continuation eventually does, the theory continues, it will be doing it in conversation with that silence. The Wattersons will return eventually as characters change by the long pause, even if they are the same characters in the same shapes. The audience returning to them will be changed too. The viewers who watched the original episodes as children are now adults, with their own jobs at their own rainbow factories, their own families in their own small houses, their own small daily failures with money and love. They will read the new episodes through eyes that were not available when the original episodes aired. And the show, the theory suggests, will be deeper for it, even if it makes none of the changes itself. The audience has done the work. The show only has to come back and find them where they are. There is, in the lore of the show that has gathered in its absence, also a body of theory about specific minor characters that deserves at least a passing mention, because part of why the fan community is so devoted is the depth of the bench. Take Banana Joe, the show's living banana, who appears on the surface to be a one-note pun character. The theory work that has built up around Banana Joe focuses on the implications of his existence. He has a father, a mother, a small family. He is a perfectly normal banana in every respect, except that he is a person, he attends school, he has friendships, he has aspirations. The implications of taking him seriously, the theory argues, are that nothing in Elmore is what it pretends to be. The food in the show is sentient. The animals are sentient. The objects are sentient. There is, in the kitchen of the Wattersons, an entire fridge full of unspoken horror if you start to think too hard about who in Elmore counts as a person and who does not. The show, true to its instincts, raises this question once or twice and then declines to answer. There is an episode in which the Wattersons eat a meal that, from the wrong angle, would constitute a war crime. The show plays it for laughs. The implications are real all the same. Similarly, the theories around Alan, the sentient balloon, are surprisingly grim once you sit with them. Alan is, on the surface, the most positive character in the show. A calm, smiling balloon whose pacifism and gentleness border on the saintly. The theory work around him focuses on how unstable his existence is. He is a balloon. A balloon can be popped. The show, more than once, hints that Alan is aware of his own mortality in a way the other characters are not, and that his relentless optimism is a coping mechanism for the constant awareness that a single sharp object could end his life. There's at least one episode that brings this subtext very close to the surface, and the fan community has built it out from there. Alan on this reading is the show's quietest study in living gracefully with the knowledge that you could go at any moment. He smiles, he helps, he loves his girlfriend, Carmen the Cactus, who is, in any conventional reading, the one creature in town most equipped to end him by accident. He chooses her anyway. He chooses to live anyway. He is one of the small, heroic figures of Elmore, and the show treats him with a tenderness that makes the meaning land without underlining it. The cactus and the balloon, the goldfish and the cat, the peanut and the shape changer, the rabbit and the rabbit, the ghost and the bully, the cheese and the donut. Elmore is, when you list it out, a poem of impossible pairs. And the theories that have grown around those pairs are part of why the show is, as a cultural artifact, more than just a children's cartoon. It is a body of work that people have been talking about in detail for years now, and the talking has produced its own folklore. There are essays, there are very long online posts, there are videos like this one, and others again. The show, in being so generous with its own strangeness, has invited a kind of perpetual conversation. And the fact that this conversation is still going, all these years after the original run came to a halt, is part of why the news of the film and the new season feels, to the people who love the show, less like a return and more like a long-awaited reply. The minor character theories of the Amazing World of Gumball would, by themselves, fill a video of their own, but a few of them are worth walking through because they show how thoroughly the show rewards a slow, careful eye. Take Sarah, the sentient, soft pink doe character who joins the cast in the middle seasons and becomes, on the surface, a friendly stalker character whose obsessive love of Gumball and Darwin runs throughout her appearances. The first read on Sarah is simple. She is the show's wink at its own fans, the character who breaks the fourth wall most often, the one who knows that Gumball and Darwin are the protagonists of a story and acts on that knowledge. There is an episode in which she essentially confesses to being a fan fiction writer about them. The joke is layered, sharp, and very confident. But the second read on Sarah is, like everything else in the show, more melancholy than the first. Sarah's obsessive love is, on this reading, a portrait of how it feels to be a fan of a story that is going to end. She wants the heroes to be perfect. She wants their friendship to be exactly the friendship she imagines. She wants the show to give her the moments she has been picturing. And the show, in writing her, knows that no story can satisfy that fully. Sarah is a sweet character who is also, by being so devoted, a quiet warning. Loving a story too completely is, the show suggests, a kind of small heartbreak that the lover has to learn to live with. Take Carrie, the ghost. Carrie's existence is, by itself, a clue. If Carrie is a ghost, somebody died. The show, with its usual calm refusal to over-explain, never tells you who Carrie was when she was alive, or how long ago, or what kind of death produced her. She is simply there, drifting along the lockers, dating Darwin in the middle seasons, becoming a kind of secondary romantic lead. The theory work around Carrie has produced a number of variations. There is the reading in which she died centuries ago and has been bound to Elmore for reasons even she does not remember. There is the reading in which she is, in some sense, a more comfortable resident of the void than the other characters are, because her own deathlessness has prepared her for that kind of in-between existence. There is the reading in which she is, very quietly, the show's most spiritually advanced character, because she is the only one who has, in any meaningful sense, looked at her own death and accepted it. The show, again, refuses to confirm any of these. It treats her as a sweet, slightly gothic teenage girl, lets her go to the school dance, lets her have a small, bashful relationship with Darwin, and lets the audience do the rest of the work. The work is not subtle. Carrie is a ghost in a show about identity. She is the most uncanny character in a town full of impossible inhabitants, and the show pretends that this is normal, which means, by extension, the audience pretends too. Which means, by further extension, the rules of life and death in Elmore are no longer the rules the audience was raised with. The show has, by including her, quietly reshaped what counts as living. Take Hector, the giant who lives at the edge of town. Hector is, when you first see him, the size of a small mountain, and the show's first joke about him is the absurdity of trying to keep him hidden from view. He is enrolled at Elmore Junior High, he attends classes, he sits ridiculously in a classroom that does not fit him. The deeper theory work around Hector is more disturbing than most fans expect when they first encounter him. The show more than once hints that Hector is dangerous when frightened, that his anger could destroy the town, that his existence is held together by the love and care of his mother and a few close friends. There is an episode in which the threat of Hector breaking free of his emotional balance is, briefly, played as serious cosmic horror, and the resolution of the episode involves the entire town accepting that they have been living next to a giant who is one bad day away from leveling them. The show treats this lightly, it moves on, but the audience does not quite move on. Hector becomes, in the fan imagination, a symbol of how Elmore manages threat. The town does not fight Hector. The town does not exile him. The town teaches its children to love him so completely that he chooses not to break. That is a strange model for civic life, and it is also, in its calm cartoon way, a remarkably beautiful one. The show is suggesting that even monsters can be held in place by being loved, not by being restrained, by being recognized, which fits neatly with the noticing theory we mentioned earlier. The town is held together by attention. It is held together by love. The Robinsons, next door to the Wattersons, are another small case study and one of the show's quietest comic engines. Mr. Robinson is a small, angry, pear-shaped man whose face is permanently pinched into disapproval. Mrs. Robinson is calm, tolerant, patient. They have been married for a long time. They have a son, Rocky, who is one of the kindest characters in the show, and who, in a sequence that runs across several seasons, is shown to be the school bus driver, the school janitor, and a working musician all at once, all done with the gentle patience of someone who has never been treated quite fairly by life. The Robinson family is, on the surface, comic relief. The deeper theory reading of them is that they are the Wattersons looked at from a slightly different angle. The Robinsons are also not wealthy. The Robinsons also struggle with money. The Robinsons also have between them the quiet weight of a marriage that has lasted longer than it has been happy. And Rocky, the gentle son, is the version of Darwin that grew up. He is the kind boy who became the kind adult in a household that did not quite know what to do with him. The show treats Rocky with enormous tenderness in the rare episodes that focus on him. He is, in fact, one of the most quietly beloved characters in the entire run, partly because his goodness in a town as cynical as Elmore looks like a small daily miracle. The Robinsons, taken together, are the show's mirror to the Wattersons. They are what the Wattersons would have looked like 20 years from now if certain decisions had gone the other way. These minor character readings, taken together, form a kind of constellation. The show, by populating its town this densely, gives the audience 100 small lives to think about. And the lives, when you put them next to each other, form a single quiet portrait of an entire community. The Robinsons, the Yoshidas, the Fitzgeralds, the Senecors, the teachers, the classmates, the clerks, the donuts on the police force, the single mothers in the background of supermarket scenes, the bullies who, when given a single episode of focus, turn out to be sad children, the cheerleaders who, when given a single episode of focus, turn out to be lonelier than they look. Elmore is, in this sense, one of the most carefully drawn fictional towns on television, partly because it is so completely uncommitted to its own laws of nature. It does not have to make sense as a place. It has to make sense as a community. And the show, episode by episode, builds that community out of the small interactions of impossible neighbors. The dragons say hello to the children. The clouds float their kids to school. The trees attend the same parent-teacher conferences as the cats. The ghost girlfriend goes to the school dance with the goldfish brother. And the town, in the patient way of fictional towns, holds them all. There is one more region of the show that the theory community returns to often, which is the region of its hidden continuity. The Amazing World of Gumball is, by reputation, an episodic comedy. Most episodes can be watched in any order. Most plotlines reset by the end of the half hour. But beneath the surface, the show is unusually careful about what carries over and what does not. There are characters who appear in a single episode early in the run, and then return much later, with the show treating their return as if the audience had been expecting it. There are jokes set up in Season 1 and paid off in Season 5. There are objects that pass through the background of dozens of episodes and turn out, eventually, to have been part of a larger plot. The world of Elmore has a memory, in other words, that the comedy episodes do not always make use of, but that the bigger arcs do. And once you start looking for the long memory of the show, you start seeing it everywhere. The girl who appeared once in a crowd scene in the first season is back several seasons later with a name and a small storyline. The strange object on the Watterson coffee table in an early episode is the same object that, much later, becomes briefly central to a different plot. The show is not just generous with its surrealism, it is generous with its continuity. It rewards the audience that pays attention. And by extension, it lets the version of the audience that does not pay attention drift past it without ever noticing how layered it is. That hidden continuity is in many ways the source of the show's deepest theory work. There are fans who have built timelines of Elmore stretching across the entire run, identifying the small recurring details that the casual viewer misses, mapping out which characters were where, on which day, in which year. The work involved is, frankly, enormous, and the fact that this work even produces a coherent map says something significant about how carefully the show was, in fact, planned. The writer's room was, by reputation, a place of constant cross-referencing. The smallest visual gag was often also a piece of the larger architecture, and the longer the show ran, the more the architecture began to show. The final cliffhanger, with its slow gathering of the show's themes and its precise framing of the central threat, is the moment at which the architecture became most visible. The pieces had been there all along. The audience could see finally why each of them had been placed where it had been. And then the show stopped, and the architecture has been sitting there ever since, half finished, waiting for the writer's return. A small detour before we move on is worth taking through the Easter egg layer of the show. The Amazing World of Gumball is, by any reasonable count, one of the most Easter egg-dense cartoons of the last 20 years. It is the kind of show that hides jokes and signs that flicker across the screen for a single second. It hides references to other Cartoon Network shows in the wallpaper of background rooms. It hides the names of crew members on posters in the supermarket. It hides recurring fictional brands across episodes, with small evolutions to their logos that suggest a fictional history. There is a running joke involving a fictional gas station chain that, on close inspection, has its branding updated subtly across the seasons. There are clocks in the background that, more often than not, are showing impossible times or running backwards, or simply not telling time at all. There are background characters drawn in styles that are mismatched to the foreground. A single live-action person walking through a flat animated crowd, a hand-drawn dog wandering across a photograph of a real park, a puppet child sitting in a class of two-dimensional teenagers. The show is, in this sense, a kind of constant, low-level visual practical joke played on the audience. And the joke, for the audience that catches it, is part of the show's deepest pleasure. These Easter eggs also feed back into the theories. Some fans, with a level of patience that does not strictly belong to mortals, have cataloged every visible sign in every episode looking for patterns. Some have argued that the recurring fictional brands across the show, the supermarket, the gas station, the donut chain, the cinema, are all owned by the same fictional holding company, whose name appears in small print on signs in just enough scenes to count. The theory is that Elmore is, in some sense, a company town, that the entire economic life of the place is being quietly funneled through a small number of related businesses, all part of the same hidden parent organization. The show, in its calm refusal to underline these details, never confirms or denies the theory. But the details are there, the signs are there. The slow erosion of small businesses across the seasons, replaced by chains, is there. And the audience that watches closely can see, with a kind of low-grade dread, that something is happening to Elmore's economy in the background that the foreground characters are not in a position to notice. The Wattersons are arguing about laundry. The Wattersons are getting into trouble with school. The Wattersons are in love and in debt. Behind them, the town is changing. The show, in being honest about that change without underlining it, becomes, on this reading, a quiet record of how communities lose themselves. There is a related body of theory work about the recurring background sign at the edge of town that, across the run, displays different and slightly contradictory population numbers for Elmore. Sometimes the sign reads one figure, sometimes another. Sometimes the figure goes up, sometimes down. The fan community has, of course, made charts of this. The charts suggest that the population of Elmore is, across the run, drifting downwards. Slowly, very slowly. The show is implying that there are fewer people in the town at the end than there were at the beginning. The theory, in its calmest form, is that Elmore is losing residents. The void is filling. The simulation, if there is one, is shrinking. The town the audience is watching is gradually depopulating, and the only inhabitants safe from this slow erasure are the ones we know best. The named ones, the ones the show has chosen to keep. Everyone else is slowly going somewhere. The show does not say where, but the sign at the edge of town keeps changing. And the changes, when you put them next to each other, all point in the same direction. That kind of theory is exactly the kind of theory that the show invites without ever endorsing. It is unconfirmed. Nothing in the canon explicitly tells you that Elmore is losing population. The numbers on the sign could be a recurring visual joke about how nobody on the production team can agree on the canonical figure. The shrinking could be coincidence or a small running gag. But the fact that the show is the kind of show that supports the question, the fact that the population number is visible at all, the fact that it changes, the fact that the changes form a pattern, is itself a kind of statement. The show is in conversation with the kind of audience that will count. And the kind of audience that will count is the kind of audience that comes home to a video like this one, on a quiet night looking to be told about the patterns. The Amazing World of Gumball is, in this sense, a show that was always going to belong to its theorists. Its writers wrote it that way, its animators drew it that way. And the audience, by responding the way they have, has confirmed the contract. The story is happening on multiple levels at once, and the audience that pays attention is being treated gently as a co-writer. Pulling the threads together for a moment, what the Amazing World of Gumball seems to suggest, beneath all the surreal jokes and meta-gags and shape changes and ghost girlfriends and balloons in love with cactuses, is something quite simple. It suggests that the world we are given to live in is, in important ways, made of stranger material than we usually admit. It suggests that the rules of identity, of mortality, of money, of love, of belonging, are not as fixed as we like to pretend. It suggests that the systems we live inside are often indifferent to us. It suggests that the only thing that can make any of it bearable is the practice of paying close attention to the people we share the inside of those systems with. The show is, in its deepest mood, a kind of quiet sermon delivered through the strangest mouthpieces a cartoon could find. And the audience, by sitting with it, becomes part of the sermon. Whether you watched the original episodes at the time they aired, or whether you are coming to them now, in the late hours, on a screen in a quiet room, the show is asking the same things of you. Pay attention. Be kind to the people you live with. Notice the ones who are at risk of being forgotten. Love the ones who change shape on you. Be soft with the ones who have given up. Do not assume that the rules of the world are stable just because they look that way today. That sermon, if you want to call it that, is the reason the show has aged the way it has. Children's cartoons usually age into nostalgia, or in the worst cases, into embarrassment. The Amazing World of Gumball has aged into a kind of quiet companionship. The adults who watched it as children come back to it for the warmth, for the family dynamics, for the small jokes about credit cards and bills that suddenly resonate in a way they did not when the audience was young. The teenagers who are watching it for the first time now, in the long shadow of streaming services, find a show that feels weirder and more alive than most of the new productions that surround it. The show belongs, in some sense, to a moment in television that may not come back. The moment in which a small team of dedicated weirdos could be given 6 seasons and freedom and time to do something this strange. That moment is fragile. That moment passes. The show is one of its great products, and possibly, depending on how the future of animation goes, one of its last great products. Whatever comes next in the format, The Amazing World of Gumball will be remembered by the people who paid attention as a particularly bright example of what the format could do when it was given room. The cultural footprint of the show by now is also worth naming because it is part of why the theory community is so deep. The Amazing World of Gumball is one of the most quoted, screenshotted, and referenced cartoons of the past decade. Its jokes have become memes, its character designs have become cultural shorthand. Its episodes have become the source of an unending supply of small reaction images that travel across the internet, often divorced from their context, often used in conversations that have nothing to do with the show itself. That kind of footprint is, in the strange way of modern culture, a measure of how much a show is loved. Things that people love become tools they reach for when they need to express something. The Amazing World of Gumball has become, for an entire generation, that kind of tool. The face of Gumball mid-panic is the universal symbol of mid-panic. The face of Aeneas mid-sigh is the universal symbol of having to deal with too many fools at once. The face of Richard mid-eating is the universal symbol of contentment. The face of Darwin mid-weep is the universal symbol of being more tender than the situation calls for. The cultural language built out of the show is, by now, large enough that people who have never watched a full episode have nonetheless used pieces of it for years, the way people who have never read a novel still use phrases from books they have not read. There is a theory, almost too small to count as a theory, but persistent enough to keep coming back, about the way the show treats time. The Amazing World of Gumball, across its run, is unusually careful about not telling you what year it is. The technology in the Watterson household is, depending on the episode, modern or slightly outdated. The school equipment is, depending on the episode, futuristic or recognizably stuck in the early 2000s. The cars on the road sometimes look like they were drawn in the 1980s. The clothes some of the side characters wear sometimes belong to an even earlier decade. The show, in short, refuses to anchor itself to any specific moment. The fan reading of this is that Elmore is not just spatially separated from any real place. It is also temporally untethered. It is in its own decade made of pieces from many others. The implication, if you take it seriously, is that the population of Elmore are, in some sense, refugees from time, gathered into a town where the centuries have been allowed to overlap. The simulation on this reading is a simulation of memory itself, a composite of the past, sustained for unclear reasons, populated by characters who are made of borrowed parts. That is, again, a theory the show does not confirm. But the visual evidence supports it. The show looks the way it does partly because it does not want to be pinned down. And the audience, especially the audience that has lived through a lot of decades themselves, can feel why. That refusal to be pinned to a date is, by the way, part of why the show works so well as a companion piece in the late hours. When a show is anchored to a specific moment in time, the reference is date, and the rewatching of it has an undertow of mourning, the feeling that the world the show came from no longer exists. The Amazing World of Gumball, partly by accident, partly by design, avoids that. It is from no decade in particular. It is somehow contemporary in any year you decide to put it on. The phones look like they could be any phones. The clothes look like they could be any clothes. The colors look like the kind of colors people would choose at any point in the modern era. The show, in being untethered, becomes evergreen. The Wattersons are not from the year 2011 when the show first aired. They are not from the year 2019 when the original run ended. They are not from the year you happen to be watching them in. They are from Elmore, which is its own time, and Elmore, like all good fictional places, is in a kind of perpetual present. They are always doing their absurd things, always loving each other badly, always failing to pay their bills, always being noticed and forgotten by their town in the same gentle ratios. The show, in being untethered, is also unaging, returning briefly to the theme of the final cliffhanger and what it actually meant. The most popular reading among fans is that the figure who arrives to investigate Elmore Junior High is, in some sense, the show's externalization of its own cancellation. The town, by the end of season 6, is full to the brim with strangeness. The simulation, if it exists, is straining. The void, if it counts as a place, is filling up. The cracks in the world have widened. The investigator's job on this reading is to do the work that the production system itself was about to do, which is to bring an end to the show's existence. He is, in this sense, a stand-in for the network. He is the suit who arrives at the studio to ask why the budget has gone over and what the writers think they are doing. He is the part of the world that does not like all this strangeness and wants to clean it up. And the cliffhanger is, on this reading, not just a cliffhanger inside the fiction. It is the moment at which the show, from the inside, faced the threat that was going to end it from the outside. The investigator was always going to win. The show was always going to stop. The cliffhanger is the show's way of acknowledging, without naming, that the writers knew this was coming. That reading is, of course, also a theory and unconfirmed. The official accounts of the show's pause are about scheduling and the network's plans, not about cosmic horror. But the show, as we have established, is a show that invites this kind of double reading. The literal narrative runs alongside a more allegorical narrative, and the allegorical narrative is the one the fan community has kept warm in the years since. The audience has decided that the investigator is the network. The audience has decided that Rob, in his bitterness, is a stand-in for the discarded ideas of the writer's room. The audience has decided that the void is the cutting room floor. The show, in its calm refusal to confirm or deny, has let these readings live. And the readings have, in turn, become part of the show, in the strange way that great cartoons sometimes outgrow their own canon. What the show is now, in the cultural imagination, is not only the episodes that aired, it is also the long, slow, devoted conversation that the audience has had around the episodes that aired. The fan community has, in a sense, written extra chapters of the show by talking about it, and those chapters live in the same cultural space as the official ones. There are naturally some theories about the show that are darker than the ones we have already covered, and these are worth touching on lightly because they are part of the conversation even where the show does not, on any honest reading, support them. There are fans who have suggested that the entire show is set inside the imagination of one of its characters, that the world we are watching is a dying dream, that the Wattersons are not real to each other but only to a single dreaming mind. These readings, while interesting, tend to require a level of selection and ignoring that goes against the texture of the show as it actually plays. The show is too generous to its minor characters, too careful with its background continuity, too rooted in the specific emotional textures of a particular working-class family to comfortably reduce to a single dreamer's fantasy. The dream theory is interesting in the same way that any dream theory is interesting. It is also, in the end, not what the show appears to be doing. It is offered here only because it is part of the conversation. Treat it gently, the way you would treat a thought that occurred to you very late in the night and stayed with you longer than it should have. There are, less darkly, theories about specific small details that have become beloved talking points among fans. There is the theory of the missing classmate, in which a particular background character appears in a single early episode and never reappears, and the fans have, across the years, built a small mythology around what happened to him. There is the theory of the spare bedroom, in which the Watterson house, in some episodes, has a room that, in other episodes, does not exist, and the fans have, with their usual patient absurdity, attempted to map the impossible geometry of the family home. There is the theory of the second moon, in which the night sky in some episodes contains slightly different astronomical bodies than the night sky in other episodes, and the fans have, of course, attempted to determine whether this is sloppiness, a joke, or a clue. None of these theories rises to the level of the simulation reading or the void reading, but they are part of the show's life among its audience. They are the conversation the show is still having with the people who love it, and every one of them is a small piece of the larger answer to the question of why this show in particular has produced this kind of community. It is worth saying plainly that part of why the show has produced this kind of community is the way its writers and animators treated the audience. The Amazing World of Gumball was made, by every account that has come out about it, by people who liked what they were doing. The crew talked openly, in interviews, about the small jokes they hid in the backgrounds, about the references they made to films and shows they loved, about the in-jokes about their own colleagues that they slid into individual frames. The show was made by people who were watching for the audience that would watch closely. That kind of show is rare. Most television, by the nature of how it gets made, has to play for the audience that is half watching while doing something else. The Amazing World of Gumball played for both audiences at once. There were jokes for the half-watching audience, big and fast and bright. There were jokes for the close-watching audience, slow and careful and rewarding rewatch. The audience that grew up with the show learned to be the close-watching audience. That is in part why the theory community is what it is. The show trained its own viewers. The wisest fans of the show will, when asked, tell you that the most important thing about the Amazing World of Gumball is not any specific theory or any specific reading. It is the texture of the world. It is the way the show makes you feel about Elmore. It is the way the Watterson kitchen in the soft light of an evening episode looks like a place you have been, even though you cannot have been. It is the way Nicole sounds when she has had enough, like a woman you know. It is the way Richard hugs his children, like a man who is, even in his failure, a father who would die for them. It is the way Anais closes her bedroom door, very quietly, when she has lost an argument she should have won. It is the way Darwin says the kind thing in the precise moment when the kind thing needs to be said. It is the way Penny changes shape, in the moments when she has been seen the way she most wants to be seen. The theories matter, in the end, only because the texture matters more. The audience does not return to the Amazing World of Gumball because of the simulation theory. The audience returns to the Amazing World of Gumball because the Wattersons feel like a family worth visiting, and Elmore feels like a town worth wandering through, and the writers, somewhere off-screen, have left the lights on for you. It is worth, before we begin, to circle back to the close of this video, dwelling for a while on what the show actually does with its episodes when it is at its best. Because there are individual half-hours of the Amazing World of Gumball that ought to be remembered the way certain individual short films are remembered. There is an episode that sends Gumball, Darwin, and Aeneas on a small odyssey through Elmore to retrieve a stolen toy, and which uses that flimsy premise to assemble one of the most visually inventive single half hours of any show on television in the last 15 years. There is one that sits with Alan, the balloon, for an entire half hour and asks, quietly and without flinching, whether unfailing kindness is a virtue or a kind of self-defense. There is a half hour that gives Aeneas the center of the story and lets her confront a version of herself that has, in some sense, made all the choices she has been quietly tempted by. And the result is one of the show's sharpest pieces of writing. There is the episode in which Gumball asks where babies come from, and the show, in trying to answer him, ends up presenting the audience with a genuinely confused account of how anyone in Elmore could possibly reproduce, given the biology of the town. The episode plays as a joke. It is also, on the second viewing, an honest admission that the show does not really know what its characters are made of, and that the not knowing is part of the story. There is an episode in which Sarah, the soft pink fanfiction creature, attempts to push Gumball and Darwin into the kind of relationship she has been imagining. And the show, with extraordinary delicacy, uses that premise to talk about the boundary between affection and obsession, and about the way fans can love a story too tightly. There is a half hour in which the family settles down to watch a clip show of their own greatest hits. And the show, by playing the clip show absolutely straight, exposes how much of any show is, in the end, made of moments stitched together by the writers and offered as a coherent life. There is a half hour in which the family discovers that they have been doing the same things in the same order for longer than they realize, and which becomes, on close watch, one of the show's most direct statements of its own thesis. The Wattersons are repeating themselves. The town is repeating itself. The show, by being aware of this, becomes an instrument for noticing the repetition. And once you have noticed the repetition, the show implies you can begin, in small ways, to break it. There is the choices again, worth coming back to, which gives Nicole the center of the half hour and follows her through a sequence of doors, each of which opens onto a version of her life that did not happen. There is the version in which she became a fighter and a champion. There is the version in which she stayed with her parents and was respectable and successful. There is the version in which she married someone else entirely and lived a life that, by every conventional measure, was easier than the one she ended up with. And the show, in the calmest possible way, refuses to make any of these alternative lives more attractive than the one she actually chose. It does not tell her that she chose well. It does not tell her that she chose badly. It only allows her to see them, briefly, and to return with full knowledge to the husband and the children and the small house and the bad job. That is a remarkable piece of writing for a children's cartoon to attempt, and the show pulls it off with a kind of restrained honesty that most live-action drama would envy. Nicole is allowed to be sad about the lives she did not live. She is also allowed to love the one she did. The two states are allowed to coexist. That coexistence is, in its own quiet way, one of the show's most adult ideas. There is the final cliffhanger, which we have already discussed at length, and which deserves a final pass before we close, because it is, in retrospect, the show's most complete statement of itself. The episode begins as a school day. It moves gradually into a piece of paranoid horror. By the end, it has become a meditation on what the world does to anomalies, and on what an anomaly's job is when the world comes for it. The students of Elmore Junior High, the entire surreal class of the show, are gathered together and threatened by a representative of the world's order. Their response, across the episode, is to stand together. The show, in its closing moments, does not allow them to defeat the threat. It allows them only to refuse to scatter. They are still there, holding the line, when the credits roll. That posture, the posture of a group of impossible creatures who have refused to leave each other in a moment of crisis, is, in some sense, the moral conclusion of the entire series. The world of Elmore is full of monsters. The world outside Elmore is full of investigators. The only thing the inhabitants of the town have, in the face of all of it, is each other. And the show, by ending on that image, makes the final argument it has been building towards all along. The world is hard. The world is going to come for you. What matters is who is standing next to you when it does. It is striking, looking back at the run as a whole, how often the show resolves its biggest plots in exactly this way. The Wattersons survive their problems when they survive them, not by being smarter or stronger than the systems that surround them, but by being unwilling to let go of each other. Nicole returns home even when the home is in trouble. Richard apologizes even when he does not quite understand what he is apologizing for. Gumball forgives Darwin. Darwin forgives Gumball. Aeneas helps when she does not have to. Penny breaks her shell and Gumball loves her in every form. The family, the friend group, the school, the town, hold together by being, in the end, just barely willing to keep holding each other. That is not a flashy moral. It is not a slogan that fits well on a poster. It is, however, the kind of moral that lives in the bones of a show that has been thought about this carefully. And it is the moral that by the time you have watched enough Gumball, you will find sitting quietly inside the way you think about your own household. The show plants that gently while you are not looking. And the planting is part of what makes it more than entertainment. It is, in its sleepy, surreal way, a piece of moral education delivered in the shape of jokes. The Amazing World of Gumball is, by these terms, more than the sum of its parts. It is a comedy. It is a family drama. It is a town portrait. It is a slow, philosophical essay about the nature of identity in a world made of mixed materials. It is a study in poverty. It is a study in love. It is a study in attention. It is a study in the small, private grief of having to live inside a system that does not see you. It is a celebration of misfits written originally by a man whose own pitches kept being rejected, animated by a team of people whose own working conditions almost certainly contain their share of small daily grievances. It is, in this sense, a piece of art made out of the same materials it is depicting. The makers of the show, like the characters in the show, were small people working inside larger systems, doing what they could with what they had, hoping that someone would notice. And the audience, by paying attention as carefully as it has been the noticing that they hoped for. The show, in the end, was its own first answer to its own most important question. The makers asked, in effect, whether attention was possible inside a system that did not care. The audience has been, for years now, the proof that it is. That is possibly the simplest and the largest theory about the amazing world of Gumball. It is not that Elmore is a simulation, or that the Void is Purgatory, or that Penny is fluid, or that Richard is a warning, or that Nicole is heroic, or that Aeneas will leave, or that Darwin chose, or that Gumball will become his father, or that the town is losing population, or that the investigator is the network. It is all of those in different ways. But underneath all of them is the simplest claim. The show is alive because the audience is alive. The audience is paying attention. The show, by being made carefully enough to reward that attention, has earned the audience it has. And the strange, intricate, half-drawn, photographed, puppeted, computer-animated, ghost-haunted, balloon-befriended town of Elmore continues to exist in the heads of the people who have loved it long after the original episodes stopped airing. That is what cartoons at their best can do. The Amazing World of Gumball is one of the clearest demonstrations of it that the medium has ever produced. Before we sign off, let us walk one more time through the long arc of the show, in the slow, tired way it actually plays out for an audience watching it the whole way through. You begin in season 1 with a family of strangers. You meet them in a supermarket, struggling with prices. You meet them in a kitchen, struggling with each other. You watch them attend school, attend work, attend the small humiliations of suburban living. You laugh at their reactions. You start gradually to recognize the way they speak. Nicole sighs in a specific way. Richard laughs in a specific way. Gumball lies in a specific way. Darwin apologizes in a specific way. Aeneas raises an eyebrow in a specific way. The voice of the show, by the end of the first season, has lodged itself in you. You did not notice it lodging. It is simply there now. The same voice, only a little louder, runs through everything that follows. By the time you reach season 3, the voice has stopped feeling like a stylistic decision and has started to feel like a way of seeing the world. You think occasionally in the show's rhythms. You catch yourself comparing your bad days to Watterson bad days. The show has begun to live, gently, inside the way you talk to yourself. In season 3, you meet Rob. You do not at first register him. He is in the background. He is a passing figure. He has in his first appearance one eye and a baseball cap and the ordinary look of a boy in a school full of strange creatures. You move past him. Then, in season 3 again, in the episode in which he falls into the void, the show pulls you back. It says, "Look at this. You did not notice him. The void is full of people you did not notice." The show takes you for the first time behind its own face and shows you what it has been hiding. You sit with that. You read it as a joke at first, then slowly you read it as something larger. By the time Rob returns, half rebuilt, in season 4, you are watching the show differently. You are looking in every episode for the background figure who might be about to fall through the world. You have learned from the show itself how to pay attention. In season 4 and 5, the show becomes a different show, while still being the same show. It deepens, it widens. It begins to address the audience. It begins to wonder on screen about its own nature. There is the great late-season meta-confrontation, the simulation question, the answer that is not quite an answer. There is the moment in which Gumball, at the end of all of this, decides to keep on living anyway. The show pauses for a beat to let that decision land. You realize, watching it now, that the show has been preparing you for that decision for years. Whatever the world is, the show is teaching you, you have to live in it. The Wattersons have to live in Elmore. You have to live in whatever it is you live in. The two situations rhyme. The show is gently asking you to apply the same logic to yourself, to choose to be present in your own life, however constructed your own life is, to love the people around you, however unstable the architecture is. Then there is season 6. The show by now knows itself completely. The episodes are denser, the jokes are sharper, the references are wider. The animation is more confident than ever. The town is more populated than ever. The minor characters are given longer, more careful arcs. The Wattersons are given quieter, more reflective episodes. The show, throughout the final season, seems to be saying goodbye to itself without telling you that it is. There are episodes that revisit places from the first season. There are episodes that bring back minor characters from years before. There are episodes that pause briefly to admire details of Elmore that the show has not lingered on since the early run. The audience watching the final season now can feel the gathering. The writers, in some quiet way, knew. The show, in some quiet way, was beginning to fold itself closed. And then, in the final episode, with all of these threads in the air, the show stopped. The investigator arrived. The town gathered. The credits ran. The original run ended. That is the shape of the story in the broadest terms. A family of strangers becomes, over 6 seasons, a family you know. A town of weirdos becomes, over 6 seasons, a community you have come to love. A small, surreal cartoon becomes, over 6 seasons, a thoughtful and unusually mature meditation on what it means to live inside a world you did not choose, with the people you happen to end up with, under conditions you cannot fully control. And then the cartoon stops, mid-sentence, leaving the family in a moment of crisis, leaving the town under threat, leaving the audience with a kind of permanent suspension. The show has been suspended for years. The new film and the new season, when they arrive, will pick up from that suspension. But the suspension itself, the long pause, has become part of the show's meaning. The Amazing World of Gumball, in being incomplete, taught its audience how to live with incomplete things, which is, given the circumstances of the real world, a useful skill. If you have been listening to all of this and you are still awake, here is what I would say. The theories matter. The simulation theory, the void theory, the noticing theory, the Watterson curse, the company town reading, the population sign, the timeless decade, the cancellation as cosmic horror. All of them matter in different ways because they are the audience's way of saying that the show was worth thinking about this hard. None of them are the final word. The show is not a puzzle with a single solution at the bottom. It is a town to visit in the late hours when you cannot quite sleep, and you want to be with a family that is, in their absurd cartoon way, your family for as long as you let them be. That is what the show is for. That is what the Amazing World of Gumball, more than almost anything else on television, was always for. To be there, to be present, to be a small group of weird, impossible people in a small, impossible town, holding the line, refusing to scatter, while the credits gather at the edge of the frame, and somebody at the back of the room finally turns out the light. There is one last cluster of small details worth lingering on because they have the quality of dreams and they suit the late hour. The Amazing World of Gumball has, scattered across its run, a number of moments that the fan community returns to whenever they want to remind themselves that the show was, at its core, capable of producing real emotion. There is the moment in an early season where Gumball and Darwin lie side by side on a roof at night, talking about nothing, and the camera holds on the small space between them long enough to feel like a real friendship. There is the moment in a middle season where Nicole comes home from work, sits on the kitchen floor without taking off her shoes, and is found there 10 minutes later by Richard, who quietly sits next to her without saying anything. There is the moment in a later season where Anais looks at her older brother and says something simple and kind. And Gumball, for once, does not have a joke ready, and the show lets the silence sit. There is the moment in the very late run when Darwin, walking home from school alone, pauses to look at a small patch of grass, and the camera lingers on the small patch of grass, and the moment passes and the show moves on, but the patch of grass stays in the audience's head for years afterwards. The show is full of these. They are the texture that makes the theories worth holding. It is worth saying, while we are gathering small things, that one of the reasons the show feels as alive as it does is the way the writers handled minor injuries to the universe. By which I mean, the way the show treated its own mistakes. There were episodes that the production team, by their own later admission, did not love. There were jokes that did not land. There were sequences that, looking back, could have been tightened. The show, in its meta moments, sometimes addressed this directly. There's at least one episode that begins with the characters openly complaining about a previous episode's plot. There is a sequence in which the show acknowledges, in passing, that it has been a long time since a particular character last appeared, and turns the absence into a small joke at its own expense. These small gestures, taken across the run, do something rare. They confirm to the audience that the show is being made by people, and that the people are watching it the way the audience is watching it. The show is not pretending to be a perfect product. The show is a piece of work made in real time by a team of human beings. The audience and the show are in this together, and the warmth that produces is part of why the relationship between the show and its audience is as deep as it is. There is, finally, the matter of how the show treats its own ending, which is to say, the matter of how it leaves you. The final moments of the original closing of the show are not, on a casual viewing, an ending at all. They are a setup. They are the start of an arc. But, watched in the context of the show's long silence afterwards, they have come to function, for many in the audience, as a kind of accidental conclusion. The family is together. The town is in trouble. The threat is gathering. The students of Elmore Junior High are holding the line. The credits run on a held breath. That image, the family and the town and the friends standing together with the threat about to break over them, is, in its accidental way, the most honest closing image the show could have produced. It does not promise that things will end well. It does not promise that everyone will survive. It promises only that nobody is being left to face it alone. And given the larger themes the show has been quietly building for 6 years, that is, in a strange way, exactly the right last frame. The Wattersons are not given a victory. They are given each other. The town is not given safety. It is given solidarity. The audience is not given a tidy answer. The audience is given a held breath and asked to hold it with them. The show, in this sense, ended on a vow. We will not abandon each other. The world is going to come for us. We will not scatter. That is the ending, intentional or not. That is what the show, in its long silence, has left in the air. Once the film and the new season arrive, that ending will, of course, be moved. The held breath will resolve. The town will go on. The family will go on. The story will continue. And it is right that it should, but the long pause has given the original run a kind of accidental wholeness that few other shows have ever achieved. The Amazing World of Gumball, by stopping when it did, became one of the most complete, incomplete shows on television. It did not get a finale. It did not need one. The show's themes had been so consistently and so deeply explored across the run that the audience, by the time the cliffhanger arrived, already knew what the show believed. Pay attention. Love the people next to you. Notice the ones at risk of being forgotten. Hold the line. Refuse to scatter. The cliffhanger is not the answer. The cliffhanger is the test. The answer was given again and again in the small moments of the previous 6 years. The audience, watching the cliffhanger, already knew how to behave. The show had trained them. And the new film, when it arrives, will be coming into a world full of people who learned, from the show itself, how to face it. It is a strange thing when you think about it that a children's cartoon about a blue cat and his goldfish brother could have done all of this. It is stranger still that the cartoon was, in its way, slightly underappreciated in its time. The Amazing World of Gumball did win awards. It was widely watched. It was praised by critics. But the depth of its work, the seriousness of its meditation on identity and attention and community was not, in the original run, fully understood by most of the people who watched it. It took the long silence afterwards and the long fan conversation that grew up to fill the silence for the show's full meaning to come into focus. That is, in the end, the way the deepest cartoons sometimes work. They aim for the audience that has not yet been formed. They plant ideas that will only come into bloom in the heads of viewers who are not yet ready to receive them. The Amazing World of Gumball was, in this sense, ahead of its own audience. The audience caught up, and the show, in being patient enough to wait, has earned the love it now has. If you find yourself, after this video, wanting to return to the show, take it gently. Start perhaps with a single early episode. Let yourself remember the small jokes. Let yourself notice the photographed backgrounds, the mixed media, the way the family talks. Move forward slowly. Watch for Rob in the background of Season 2. Let the void land when it lands. Sit with the Penny scene when it arrives. Let the choices break your heart. Let the disaster open your head. Let the final cliffhanger close it again, this time with all the theories you have heard tonight running quietly under the surface. The show will reward you. It always has. And whatever the film and the new season eventually do, the original run will still be there, holding its breath, the Wattersons still in their kitchen, Elmore still in its impossible suburb, Rob still climbing out of the void with a piece of the world in his hand, all of them waiting for the audience to come back and notice them again. They have been very patient. They are still there. It is worth one more quiet pass, since you are still with me, through what the Amazing World of Gumball gave to children's animation as a whole, because part of its meaning lives not just in itself, but in what came after it. The show, by being as visually experimental as it was, helped open up what other cartoons of its decade and the one after felt they could attempt. Shows that came along in its wake were more willing to mix styles, more willing to be openly meta, more willing to let their characters look at the camera and acknowledge the audience. Shows that came along in its wake were more willing to slow down and let small moments breathe, more willing to admit financial pressure as a real part of family life, more willing to write minor characters as if they too had inner lives. None of these techniques were invented by the Amazing World of Gumball, but the show, by deploying them all together in a major network production with widely watched broadcasts, helped move the center of the form. The animation landscape that has followed it owes it more than it usually admits, and the fact that the show is by now treated as a kind of reference text by younger animators is one of the quieter measures of its influence. There is also the influence the show has had on the audience that grew up with it, which is harder to measure but probably larger. The children who watched The Amazing World of Gumball on Cartoon Network in the early 2010s have by now grown into adults working in offices and call centers and warehouses and creative industries and freelance gigs and jobs whose titles did not exist a decade ago. Many of them, when asked what shaped their sense of humor, will mention this show. Many of them, when asked what taught them to pay attention to small visual jokes, will mention this show. Many of them, when asked which fictional family they think about most often, will mention this show. The Wattersons have become part of the inner furniture of a generation. They are referenced in casual conversation. They are quoted in private messages. They are remembered in the precise way fictional families are remembered, as if they were people we used to live near. That is, in cultural terms, a very large achievement for a half-hour comedy about a blue cat. The show, in being as careful as it was, has earned a kind of permanence that most television, however popular at the time, never achieves. And there is, last of all, the matter of the show as a sleep companion, because that is, after all, why we are here tonight. The Amazing World of Gumball is, for many of the people who love it, a show they put on to fall asleep to. The voices are soft, the colors are warm, the plots are absurd enough to distract you from your own day and gentle enough not to keep you awake. The pacing is, on most episodes, perfectly calibrated to drift you off without leaving you stranded mid-scene. The show, in its accidental way, has become one of the great late-night cartoons of the streaming era. Friends recommend it for that purpose. Parents put it on for tired children. Adults who cannot sleep put it on for themselves. The fact that it works as well as it does in that role is, in some sense, a tribute to the same qualities that make it work as a theory text. It is dense enough to hold your attention if you want to give it your attention, and gentle enough to let you go if you do not. It is a show that meets you where you are. That is a rare quality in any piece of art. It is the quality that turns a show into a companion. The Amazing World of Gumball, for the audience it has earned, is a companion. And that is the highest kind of compliment a show like this could ever receive. So as you lie there in whatever room you happen to be in, with whatever lights are still on, with the slow blue glow of your screen casting its quiet shadow on your ceiling, you can think, if you like, about the Wattersons in their kitchen, in their impossible suburb. You can think about Nicole, just home from work, taking off her shoes. You can think about Richard, somewhere in the living room, asleep on the couch with one arm hanging off the side. You can think about Gumball and Darwin at the top of the stairs, whispering about a problem that they will not in the end solve. You can think about Anais in her bedroom, reading a book that is 2 grade levels above her, with her stuffed rabbit at her side. You can think about Penny in a different house entirely, drifting from form to form in her sleep, glowing softly in her room. You can think about Carrie in a graveyard at the edge of town, drifting between the headstones without leaving footprints in the grass. You can think about Rob sitting at the edge of the void, looking back at the town that did not see him. You can think about all of them at once, in the way only late-night thoughts can hold many things at the same time. And you can let the show be what it is in your head while you drift, a small, impossible town, full of small, impossible people, holding the line, refusing to scatter, waiting for the morning. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.